Chapter 685, Clockwork Battle Arena. Chapter 685, Clockwork Battle Arena. Loading registered factotum construction schematics. Selected schematics. Combat Factotum Series 11, Weaponization, Energy Blade, Reflective Shield. Combat Factotum Series 13, Weaponization, Arquebus. Siege Factotum Series 8, Weaponization, Energy Cannons. Input command. Produce 3 patches every wave. Each patch consists of 20 factotum, 2 from Series 8, 8 Series 13, and 10 from Series 11. Confirmation required. Confirm. Assembly line status. Integrity 100%. Energy supply optimal. Require material missing. Please load the raw material at the scavenging station. Alright everyone, start loading the junk. Today we turn this garbage pile into an army of fearless soldiers. John, Glymet, Loneth, Swims at Night, Coda, Ram, and the tarnished boss mare that decided to hang out with them started to move the junk from the large piles that surrounded the Pavilion of Artifice and load it into the scavenging point. The assembly line which John retrieved from the pneumatic forge consisted of many machines. The first of which is the angry and smoking Jumbo Scavenger, a beast of industry that can disassemble any intake into its raw forms. It can turn machines into scraps of metal and wires, turn wood into blanks and sawdust, and it can even turn people and animals into dust. The second machine was the Quisquilirum Exactor, a very smart machine that can recognize and organize the disassembled materials and send them to various production lines. After the metal and the other materials needed for the factotum production were sent towards their respective supply lines, the Fornax Arma is the machine that was made to produce the factotums and arm them. There were 3 Fornax Arma machines that John was able to scavenge, and once he tried to mend them, he understood that they had the ability to 3D print various weapons and war machines. In the end, he linked all these machines to a central command unit, which he fortified in layers and layers of magical defense. This unit has become the Nexus Terminal, the link binding together his forces. One last thing, I want large energy cannons remodeled for defensive purposes. Do you have any models registered? John asked the Nexus machine that is organizing his assembly line. Searching database. 3 results found. APRC-1, HAMG, 22, ECAP, anti-personnel, rotating cannon, heavy artillery machine gun, energy cannon, anti-personnel. Let's go with the heavy artillery machine gun. Confirmation required. Confirm and make 9 of them. Mark priority is top. Aside from the army John wanted, now started working on defenses for his assembly line too. The first defensive choke points were all around the Vale of Tears area where the energy was being drawn from. John placed 3 HAMG-22s in that area by installing them on high platforms and setting them to auto-fire at non-registered fabricants, i.e. Messenger's abominations, as well as confirmed hostile entities. John started constructing 3 turrets near the assembly line and the Vale of Tears. The whole thing started to slowly turn into a military encampment. With the first patch of factotums ready, John sent them ahead on 3 routes heading towards the Brass Fortress to scout ahead. After them, he sent a few factotums to construct defenses on the 3 routes leading to the Brass Fortress. The southern route would lead to the Brass Fortress via its front gate. Practically, this is the most defended point there is. The northern route would lead to the Sanctuary of Verification, a place where many faulty factotums used to reside in the past and currently is a landfill. The central route would lead to the Mechanical Foundation, one of the largest and deepest facilities in Clockwork City. And just like how John constructed defenses on these 3 routes, Messenger seemed to have done the same and started hoarding a new response force of abominations to deal with John's factotums. It seemed that we met in the middle of all 3 routes. I managed to establish 3 defense points on each route that are weaponized with turrets. Messenger seemed to have done the same. John said and started taking out a few bracelet-like items. At first, I wanted the factotums to fight and do the work for us, but it seemed that we won't be able to keep waiting. I want the 5 of you to head out there and assist the factotums to destroy Messenger's defenses. John put the items on their wrists while he kept giving instructions. These bracelets will connect you with me. If you're injured or in danger, I can send you help or teleport you back here to the base. It can also tell you where you are and keep you connected with the others. Make sure to keep them on. Any weapon I can use? Swims asked. Blades, hammers, guns, cannons. This is a steampunk world. Literally anything goes. John replied. But if you use the bracelet to teleport back to the Pavilion of Artifice, you'd find some good stuff lying around. Arm yourself and hurry back to the fight. And after we destroy those defenses? Loneth asked. There should be the facilities where Messenger deploys his forces from. Make sure you obliterate all that you see when you get past these defenses. John said. Bada Ale. Coda's persona changed into dragon and roared to the sky. Extreme prejudice mode activated. Ram started rotating the barrels of his minigun with his eye sockets beaming red. I'm glad you two are excited, John said. One last thing, Messenger probably has gathered some elite troops to destroy our defenses as well. I want you to intercept and kill them. Then it shall be. Glymet held his sword and got ready to lead the other. John Ratson, which point do you recommend we should focus attacking on? For starters, the top lane. I mean the northern route. At least you and another two should be there, while two of you guard and scout the other routes. If you're outnumbered by enemy elites, don't fight for victory, but simply stall until reinforcements arrive and hide behind defenses. Once we gauge their ability, we may go to one of the other two lanes routes, or keep pushing if it proves to be easier. You heard him. Let's go smash some machines. Glymet headed off and was followed by the other four champions of this fight. Loneth, Swims at Night, Coda, and Ram. Hey, I'll join too. Witnessing this inspiring scene, the tarnished bossmare held a spear and ran behind them to join the fight, but John had him by the nape of his shirt. You keep feeding the scavenger machine. Why, yes, sir. And the bossmare ran back to work. John had a scary look on his face as he watched the five walk out of the Pavilion of Artifice. I don't like this, he murmured to himself. This is way too familiar for some horrible reason. And he returned to work as well to prepare for his battle against Messenger. As Glymet and others reached the Vale of Tears where the assembly line was readying a new wave of factotums, a notification arrived on their bracelets. The first factotum wave has been annihilated. All right, here's how things shall go. Loneth, you take the southern route. Ram, you take the middle route. Hold defensive positions and watch where the enemy may hide. Coda and Swims, you two follow me. Glymet said. Aye, Captain. Swims replied. Good luck, everyone. Loneth added. Luck is overrated. 77% chance. We are doomed. Ram said, headed towards the middle route, and vroomed straight ahead with his centipede wheels mode. Isn't he becoming more talkative? Loneth asked while looking at Ram. He saved my life, but he's kinda annoying, to be honest. Swims agreed. Slandering a man behind his back, are we? Sorry, GLYM. I'm heading off. Loneth cast a hovering spell and swooshed towards the southern route. Let's head off, boys. And Glymet took the two lizard boys, Coda and Swims, towards the northern route. As they passed the first, second, and third defense lines, the five adventurers were at the front line when they all started to feel their enemies approaching. In the southern route where Loneth was, she spotted an irregularly large, pale-colored factotum coming her way from the enemy's direction. Its power seemed a league beyond what Loneth can contend with. Hey, I am seeing an elite enemy. Large factotum, his energy is no joke. Loneth reported via the bracelet she had. A hostile of similar description detected. Even from Ram's side, a similar report came. I hear you. John received the reports. We should get the northern team to spare some of its members and join. This is the northern team. Swim's voice interrupted John's. We're seeing something big. Define big. John asked. Flying with two wings, has four limbs, looks like a dragon but smaller, and all mechanical. Swims replied. A titan, John realized, a clockwork titan. Just like the Daedric titan Zykiel, which is an imitation of a dragon, these clockwork titans are almost the same thing. We can deal with it, but we need time. Tell the other two to hold on. Glymet spoke to the others. Fine. Lonith and Ram, when you two face your opponents, drain out their ground troops with yours and make sure not to get hit too. Once your troops get destroyed, retreat to the first defense point and fight them under the cover of the turret. You may sustain some damage, but you'll hit them hard with the turret's help. I hear you. Lonith aimed her staff forward, and with a wave of frost, she started assaulting the pale, large factotum she spotted. As she took it by surprise from cover, her location was exposed, and the factotum locked on her. She was still hovering to not be hindered by terrain as she moved around and kept kiting around the factotum while shooting him with multiple ice spikes in an attempt to freeze its limbs. Her plan was almost successful, but its power started to ignite with the sound of an engine raging within it, and the factotum broke the frost on its limbs by simply moving them. From its back, two mechanical compartments moved, and the factotum took out a sword and an axe. You shall be purged. The factotum spoke. It is conscious. Lonith realized what she was up against at this point. This wasn't a mindless factotum like the one John was putting together. This is a living one, a factotum from the time of Sotha's Sill. In truth, factotums weren't just the servants and soldiers of Sotha's Sill, but also his creation, his people. They weren't mindless machines like those of the dwarves. Much like Ram, they had life within them. The factotum crouched to the ground in a squat position, and with a shockwave, it jumped high up with its weapons aiming for Lonith. Seeing this brutish machine coming at her, Lonith was overwhelmed for a moment, but in a split second, she activated an artifact on her body and immediately blinked from her place. Just like that, the factotum landed where Lonith was, and seeing her not where he landed, he turned around where he sensed her magicka from. She was still hovering not too far from him, but this time, she had a grin on her face. You may be a subordinate of an archwizard, but I am a master wizard, you know? With her saying that, the area around the factotum started to glow, and in a moment, the pale factotum could see an array of trap runes flashing red around it. A series of fire runes went. Boom! This explosion consumed almost all of the abomination soldiers sent by Messenger and half the factotums sent by John with the enemy pale factotum in its center. Just as the explosion dust settled, a silhouette started to walk from the dust and smoke caused by the explosion. The pale factotum was still there and didn't suffer a scratch from Lonith's trap. I'll carve her inside out like how I did with them fat Nords. The factotum screamed and charged at Lonith once again. She kept evading and dodging. Lonith found a spot to teleport to, and with the time she acquired, she gathered enough magicka and released her ancestral power, the ancestral wrath. A wave of flame wreathed her surroundings, and from it, she drew an enormous amount of power before channeling it into a beam towards the pale factotum. Even her eyes radiated like the fire she cast. The factotum blocked with its hand, but at the expense of its short blade, and started getting pushed back slowly but surely. Lonith was confident she could take him on. Meanwhile, Ram was facing a large white factotum that used a staff and cast magic. Amsavai, where are your voices? We need you now more than ever. The factotum spoke in a tone filled with sadness. Unable to answer, Ram replied, Then who will save us? Who will lift us from the depth of oblivion? Unable to answer, Set promised. He promised he would let us rest. Now I don't feel him. I feel nothing but strange, unbearable hate. Where is Set? Answer me. Unable to answer, then perish. The two mechanical constructs were slowly getting agitated by one another. The factotum seemed to have been wronged by Sotha's Sill and is going through something personal, but it started raising its staff and called a great barrage of arcane bolts towards Ram. Ram moved away around all the attacks, and when he got the chance, he started spraying the enemy with his Gatling gun. The white factotum was dodging and teleporting skillfully and closed on Ram many times, but Ram utilized his ground and would retreat to the cover of his team's turret before returning to the factotum with stronger and fiercer firepower. Seeing that Ram was using a set of centipede tracks to move around and maintain a good grip on the ground, the white factotum figured out that by destroying the ground, it would make Ram a sitting duck. A lightning spell came from the factotum's staff, and its target was the ground. Just like how a farmer plows the earth, the spell started to turn the ground upside down and close on Ram from all directions in order to devastate him with strong lightning strikes. Ram was speeding and shooting, and as he was feeling cornered, he tried to maneuver past the spell range, yet the white factotum didn't give him the chance to. Once he was in the eye of the storm, Ram's body started to change. Jet thrusters and fusion. Without getting himself cornered, Ram had to ditch the ground and hover with his jet thruster, which he could transform his lower part into. He even shot a couple of explosive attacks to divert attention and escape from the spell effective range before changing his weapon from a Gatling gun to railgun infusion. And with a charging sound, the railgun was ready and aimed at the white factotum. As for the third front, Glymet was fending off the flame attacks of the Clockwork Titan, while Coda, Dragon, was holding on to one of the Titan's wings and biting into it, while Swims at Night was held by the Titan's hands. "You are not wanted. None of us are wanted. Set has forsaken us," said the Clockwork Titan as it was fighting with agony and despair. The factotums and all the clockwork constructs may be mechanical constructs, but the suffering they are displaying is real. Something wasn't right. Glymet fought, and despite the difficulty they were up against, the three of them were pushing back the enemy. Just when they were confident enough to take it down, another one of those elite enemies showed up. Glymet noticed it first, but it was a fast abomination that moved on a single wheel rather than legs, and was very quiet and stealthy. Its aim was Glymet, but the latter was able to evade the rush attacks. This abomination had more than 2 arms. Almost 6 arms were stitched to its back aside from its natural 2 arms, and all of them had blades on their end. This grotesque thing turned on its wheel very nimbly, and with a zombified head, it stared at Glymet and launched itself towards him again. Glymet immediately evaded and picked a broken spear from the ground before throwing it into the wheel of that abomination thing. The spear jammed the wheel, and the abomination was stopped and fell immediately on its face. Glymet didn't waste the chance, and with his flaming blade, Goldbrand, he wiped the abomination off existence. Just as he did so, Swims at Night was thrown by the Daedric Titan, who felt the pressure elevated when Glymet was busy dealing with the abomination, and in the same motion, it rammed Coda into a wall and put him down. Glymet immediately jumped to the rescue and instructed the two to retreat using their bracelets. They would go back to the Pavilion of Artifice, arm themselves with new weapons and potions, and come back to the fight in full energy. Meanwhile, in the Vale of Tears, John was still thinking of the rotten feeling that crossed his chest a while ago. At that time, Glymet had just defeated the Abomination Elite and went ahead to face the Clockwork Titan on his own when a notification message reached John from the Assembly Line Control Unit. First Blood. An enemy has been slain. John's eyes widened as he was struck with realization. This rotten feeling. I knew it. If you find any errors, ads pop up, ads redirect, broken links, non-standard content, etc. Chapter 686, Clockwork Legends. Chapter 686, Clockwork Legends. 4. 3K words, double Chapter 1 guess. Part 1. Damn the accursed fates, shouted the Clockwork Titan as it was ordered to retreat by Messenger. Glymet was panting and out of stamina, but he couldn't stop now that his companions had returned. Swims, you stay here in case the Titan returns. Coda, you follow me. Glymet gave orders and started to retreat as well in order to recover. Good work, old man. John's voice echoed from the bracelet. You should return and take some items from the Pavilion of Artifice. I can't do that. I need to get to Lonith and Ram. Glymet said, in terms of combat, they are stalling their enemies well. Still, you must go to either Lonith or Ram. Ram is the closest. I still advise you to return. John said, I'll do that later. Now, what is the fastest direction to Ram? Glymet asked. Check the map function on the bracelet. You should navigate through the Mire Mechanica. John replied. This dense jungle? Glymet seemed uncomfortable with stepping into the unknown. God damn it. Don't say that word. John freaked out on the other end. What? Why? Glimmet frowned. Fuck it. John sighed in a bad mood. Yes, you have to jungle. Happy now? Whatever you say. Glimmet seemed in no mood to argue with John remotely and stepped into the mire mechanica along with Coda. The two of them traveled as fast as they could, and thanks to Coda's Argonian nature, they were crossing the mire at a good speed. Old man. John's voice was heard again. Yes. Glimmet asked. I've sent some supplies across the mire mechanica since you're too stubborn to return. You'll find these supplies stashed in mortar shells. John said. That's a great help. I guess I felt something falling just now. Glimmet went off for a while, and John kept tracking his movements through the bracelet's map. Found it, Glimmet said, but I guess some of the mire natives have taken a liking to your gifts too. Don't tell me what they are, and just dispose of them. John replied while praying in his heart. Two-headed wolves, huh? Glimmet reported the appearance of the monster he saw. John wanted to block his ears, but... Merc wolves. Delicious. Coda, dragon, screamed. I hate my life. Your team has destroyed a turret. John decided to be silent from this point on. Whoever does what, he is protesting at the rogue machine that kept bringing out his dark memories. Who destroyed the turret just now? Lonith asked. I did. Ha ha ha. Who's the most handsome treasure hunter and smuggler Argonian in Tamriel now? Swims replied with a proud laugh. Good job, Swims. Glimmet replied as he managed to liberate the supply drop from the monsters. Be careful now. They will focus their defenses against you. What? Why me? Swims asked in a shaken tone. You're the one who destroyed a turret. Glimmet replied playfully. Damn it. A minute later, Glimmet and Coda broke through the mire and stumbled on the sorry side of Ram, who was being cornered by the white factotum. Without further ado, Coda picked a small boulder and tossed it at the mechanical elite, causing the latter to evade just as Glimmet sent a wave of flames at it. The two cooperated instinctively to get Ram out of his corner as the latter activated the escape sequence on his bracelet. Facing the white factotum now was Glimmet and Coda, who reversed the situation since the white factotum is a much easier opponent than the Clockwork Titan. They pushed him back fast enough that they were in the range of the enemy defense line. Unlike John's Gatling gun tower, this defense system was rather a magical one that shoots arcane bolts. It was hard to dodge still and annoyed Glimmet a lot, but Coda was keeping his distance and throwing anything he saw at anything, whether it was the tower, the white factotum, or the abomination minions. Glimmet plodded swiftly and rushed behind the enemy's defense point to corner the white factotum at the expense of a couple of hits from the defense tower, which he managed to tank, and pincered the white factotum with Coda. Seeing that both his retreat and attack options were blocked, the white factotum took cover from Glimmet and focused his firepower on Coda. From his staff, 10 highly concentrated bolts of lightning were formed, and their target was the oversized Argonian. These attacks were highly lethal, yet once again, Glimmet decided to tank one hit from the defense tower to fish him out of his cover and save Coda. As the white factotum evaded the danger of Glimmet's attacks, it noticed a shadow growing around over its head, and out of literal nowhere, a large boulder descended on the white factotum, leveling it with the ground. An enemy has been slain. Nice! Glimmet shouted in excitement, but he saw something happen to the white factotum and Coda. As for the factotum, it was too broken to move, but as its chest piece burst out, Glimmet could see a black soul gem resting inside its chest and connected to the factotum in a weird mechanical way. As for Coda, he seemed very exhausted and shrunk back from his dragon persona to the normal cowardly Coda. Shit, John, Coda must retreat to recover. Send Ram to the middle route while I rush to aid Lonith. Glimmet called. Yes, hurry. Lonith's voice interrupted the call. 2 more elite abominations are joining the damn elite factotum. It's okay, John replied calmly. Old man, you remain where you are. I've already activated the escape sequence on Coda's bracelet. Watch out for the abominations. But Lonith is, Glimmet shouted. I said it's okay. Help is on the way. John replied. Ram, Drop altitude. On the southern route, a buzzing sound was heard as an object came dropping from the sky at an unimaginable speed, and it started to swoosh, 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 swoosh. The sound of the Gatling gun sounded with 4 lines of smoke speeding amidst the hail of bullets towards the enemies that were facing Lonith. The 2 of them were assassin abominations, the same kind of mini-armed, single-wheeled abomination which Glymet faced at the northern route. These abominations, as well as the pale factotum that was chasing Lonith, were hit directly by the hail of bullets and 4 bombarding missiles. The sheer destructive power of this air-to-ground attack was so great that it killed the 2 elite abominations on the spot. An enemy has been slain. Double kill. Activating Lightning Blade. Ram suddenly started to break apart in the air and separate from the temporary flying parts before descending in a straight beeline towards the pale factotum, and a blue thin line was seen cutting it through. Where Ram landed was far behind the pale factotum, which didn't even stagger before sliding part from part as the cut appeared in a thin line from its left shoulder to its right side, and it fell completely disabled. Triple kill. Amazing Ram. Lonith shouted while she staggered from exhaustion. Just at this moment, the factotum lying between them started to glow brightly as if magic was activating from within, and as the 2 avoided the possible attack, they found out that the pale factotum was teleported away. The same thing happened in the middle route where Glymet is. Once John heard of that, and heard about what Glymet noticed in these factotums, he started thinking. Factotums powered by black soul gems. I've read about this somewhere. John said, the black soul gems are the only kind of soul gems that can house a black mortal soul. Originally, natural geode, soul gems, can't house mortal souls thanks to their nature, which is different from every lesser creation. But throughout history, a few people have discovered the method to create black soul gems. The first who are theorized to have done so are the Ideal Masters, Lords of the Soul Cairn, a realm for the dead. The Ideal's Masters were said to have existed before the first era way back in the prehistoric times of the Merethic era. The second to have discovered the Black Soul's gems was either Sotha Sil or Lady Vastari, a former worm cultist and the immortal Witch of Azura, via reverse engineering the regular soul gems. Currently, Manamarco the Worm God is the fastest entity that can create those black soul gems. If these soul gems in the chests of those factotums weren't made by the worm cult, then we're looking at something very, very ancient. Sotha Sil's soul trapped some of his followers to give them immortality as machines. So, if I am not mistaken, those factotums you just fought are historical figures. He's always this detail-oriented? Swims asked, while shaking his head from the amount of information John just poured into their ears. He's a 4th-generation apprentice of Divaith, FYR. Lonith defended John. Either way, John ignored them. Ram and Lonith, you 2 have nothing in your way now. Press forward and destroy their first defense. Make sure those factotums that retreated don't surprise you. On it, Ram replied. I need to recover a bit more. Lonith complained. Guys, Swims at Night shouted. I'm being pressured here by those weird things. John, send Coda to Swims once he recovers. Glymet spoke to John. No, I'll send Coda to Ram and Lonith in the south. John said, Swims, I want you to drag those abominations away to the mire. You'll have a terrain advantage there, since you are an Argonian and they move on wheels. Once you're done with them, rush to where Ram and Lonith are. All right, Swims didn't disagree and started taking his enemies to the mire. Old man, you should destroy the turret in front of you to cause the enemy to panic, then move to the southern route as well. Once the 5 of you are there, you should break through any defense in front of you. This is risky, John. Glymet complained. This is a trap, old man. John replied. Messner is now busy dealing with you and thinking that he should save his strength to face me. He's focusing too much on the game now. If he sends any of his machines to the Vale of Tears, I shall welcome them in person. Best of luck then. John's trickery was working so far. Glymet didn't want to complain since he was also focused on the current fight, while John was planning for 3 fights ahead already. Also, it is not wise to go against a trustworthy commander. The plan accelerated smoothly. Glymet managed to destroy a turret, while Ram and Lonith also destroyed a turret with the help of the combat factotums. This meant that the enemy was set back by a complete stage of defense on all three fronts. The problem now is the front John was aiming for, the southern route, or in other words, the main gate of the Brass Fortress. This was the least point one would expect for an attack to come from. The bulwark of the fortress is made of thick metal and almost impossible to destroy, but the plan was to go forward this way. Who knows if this is a double trick or a triple one? As the 5 champions gathered in the southern lane, they destroyed another turret and started to meet the new patch of elite abominations. The combined efforts of the 5 overwhelmed any enemy in their way, and they reached the final defense line at the gate of the fortress. There, they clashed with the final turret and vanquished their foes, but the amount of the elite enemies that faced them started to increase. Ram took care of all the small fries thanks to his spray-and-pray tactic, while Glymet tanked for the rest and took care of any harassment done by the enemy. Finally, the final turret has fallen. John, we have entered the city from the southern route. The first gate was broken long ago, but there is a large barricade far in the city that will block us. Lonith reported. All right, it seems that all the fight right now is happening in your direction. Is there any sign of Messenger? No, she replied. I see this slimy fucker. John cursed in a low tone. Be on alert. Make sure you uncover the machine that is creating those abominations and destroy it. On it, the group didn't dally longer and destroyed a large device that was one of the defensive systems used by the Brass Fortress, which was used to put limitations on hostile abilities. The moment this device was destroyed, Lonith and John felt like their ability to contact the other realms like Oblivion and such have been restored, and they're now capable of manually escaping Clockwork City to Oblivion and also capable to conjure the Daedra and the undead of Oblivion. With this, a whole new league of possibilities was opened. Lonith used specialty magic conjuration and spammed a score of frost atronachs left and right. Those brutish and colossal golems of ice didn't spare any abomination and destroyed all they could touch, such as the terrifying power of a conjuration master. We are coming to your aid, Outlanders. And amidst the heat of battle and from the insides of the Brass Fortress, multiple men and women in brass and white attires started to flood the battle between John's factotums and Messenger's abominations, targeting Messenger's horrendous creations. The Clockwork Apostles. Swims at night looked at the unexpected reinforcements and smiled with glee. I am not the heroic sort, but damn, this thing has its moments. Don't stop. We need to uproot those fuckers before more of them are created. Galen, the leader of the Clockwork Apostles, shouted at his comrades as he led a powerful charge. This all happened while Coda, who didn't shift into his dragon persona, was fighting a desperate fight against a single abomination before a Clockwork Apostle fell in the fight and his weapons rolled to Coda. Seeing this advanced clockwork arquebus, Coda held it up and immersed himself in its marvelous firepower. At this point, an elite abomination spotted Coda and charged towards him with its blade, aiming to rip the petite Argonian apart. In retaliation, Coda aimed the arquebus at the abomination and took one shot at it, but he didn't expect the explosive recoil and barely grazed it. The abomination staggered, but it was too close to Coda to give up now, and its mind was remodeled into that of a killing machine. Coda felt like he wasn't going to survive this, but in a blue flash, Ram interrupted the abomination and killed it with his blue lightning blade. Seeing how far those two oddballs came together, they started to develop some sort of camaraderie from which a new technique was developed. It only needed Coda to ask for it. I need to get a high ground in order to shoot better, Coda said. Mobile shooting compatible? Ram asked. I guess so, Coda replied. Ram then turned around and left his back open for Coda. This invitation was for Coda to hop on Ram's shoulder, since one was a small Argonian and the other was a large factotum. Coda didn't hesitate and climbed up before attaching himself to Ram and readying his arquebus. Ram then did Coda something incredible. He handed him the Gatling cannon. Just as Coda held it, His eyes brightened up, widened, and a new air started to flow around him. With a confident smile, he sneered and aimed the Gatling cannon forward. "Oh, cheers, mate. This is what I call fair dinkum awesome," Coda said in a voice that appeared very different. "Let's blast the heads of those bloody wankers, shall we?" At this moment, Ram started slicing and dicing while Juan, Coda's maniac persona, focused on spraying the bullets with extreme prejudice. Part 2. Meanwhile, in the Pavilion of Artifice, Nefertiti suddenly dashed toward John and jumped while transforming into her human form to crash into his face. "What girl?" John asked. "The shadow is open, human," she replied. John looked at her, and a smile formed on his face slowly. "Come out, you idiots," John called with a wide grin. To this call, the shadow beneath him expanded, and many figures started to emerge from that darkness. The first was a gigantic warrior armored in bone samurai armor and swords, Odakuro of Wrath. The second was a black horse that looked like a walking dark ghost with 8 legs rather than 4, Sleipnir of Greed. The third was a translucent woman with great beauty and nothing to cover her sinful curves, Venus of Lust. The fourth was a black floating dragon priestess with a red-eyed ornate skull for a head, Potima of Envy. The fifth was a creature of gore and blood that made anything made by Messenger look bearable, Gluttony. And last but not least, the sixth was a staff that rose in front of John and rested dearly in his hand, Pride. John and his sin artifacts, which were hiding in the shadow dimension for protection, were finally reunited and ready to wreak havoc. John stood up and snapped his finger to return them all to his ring. He then called out one item, a long polearm with a spear head, an axe head, and a hammer head. The infamous halberd that the Dragonborn uses to hunt dragons, the unenchanted yet nigh indestructible weapon, Cliffhanger. John held that weapon and headed towards the middle lane. Meanwhile, in the enemy stronghold, a sudden shift of momentum happened when some elite enemies started to emerge. Coming from the back of the enemy lines, the Clockwork Titan, the White Factotum, and the Pale Factotum all seemed to have been repaired after being called back by Messenger. They launched an attack against the group of champions and the Clockwork Apostles, which showed how much those three were terrifyingly strong, and their power together was multiplied and supported greatly. "No, why are they here?" Galen, the Clockwork Apostle, shouted in a fearful tone. "Galen, who are those?" Lonith asked as she tried to stop the Clockwork Titan with her tronch, but they were all being pushed back. "These are..." Just as Galen was about to reveal the identity of Messenger's 3 champions, a strange feeling covered the battlefield. It started with a ground tremor that was felt vividly even in this heated battle. What came next was something unexpected. "Your team has destroyed a turret." Those who saw the message couldn't pinpoint its cause, but just some seconds later, another message followed. "Your team has destroyed a turret." The turret defense line guarding the middle lane, which was already abandoned, was destroyed so badly that a cloud of dust blocked the view of that area. The parts of the destroyed turret came flying from the direction of the mechanical foundry where the middle route led, and as something started to break the place apart, the ground started to shake with every single tremor caused by the culprit of that ruckus just now. It was safe to say that the abominations, those senseless mishmashes of flesh and machine, have grown a survival instinct towards what was coming from the mechanical foundry, and even the ones that came from there were actually escaping. One of the elite abominations, which was a towering giant, was suddenly split into 2 vertical halves when a black ebony weapon descended from upward and split off. "You have slain an enemy." The weapon was dragged away, and as the tower abominations halves fell aside in synchrony, the culprit was revealed. He was wearing the Lord's mail and a Nordic steel helmet of ancient designs. His blue eyes, red hair, and pale skin were the only things that were visible of him when he approached the battle slowly. To his allies, this was the most powerful existence that would dominate the field. To his enemies, this was a menace, and their reactions to him were surprising. The abominations appeared as if they have awakened a survival instinct. The factotums seemed to be considering him a commander, and the Clockwork Apostles were threatened and taken by his existence. But the strangest reaction so far was that of the two elite factotums that are white and pale, as well as the Clockwork Titan. Those three in particular seemed to have gone silent and stopped talking altogether. They were always complaining about Sothis Sil, praying to Sothis Sil, or cursing Sothis Sil. Right now, they seemed to have forgotten about Set all at once. They saw someone they recognized, a Nord warrior with a great weapon resting on his shoulder, marching towards them in fire and smoke while stomping on brass, as if it was grass, and forming a river of blood wherever he steps. Their mortal enemy, their people's enemy, their home's enemy, their oppressor, their conqueror, their slayer. Ziu Losbo Fahin Klav Ark Ziu Fent Krien Hyas Inra. The Nord spoke an alien tongue, but the more he spoke, the more the world started to tighten, and the more suffocating it felt, even for the lungless machines. It is him, no doubt about it. It is the walking legend. The King of Nords. The pale factotum spoke. The gray Shadow King. The white factotum spoke. Wolf Hearth. The Clockwork Titan spoke. Only one man, they knew, was arrogant enough to speak not in the tongue of man or mare, but only in the tongue that would make the world shake. Ismir Wolfhearth. The man who just boldly said that he will slay them all and offer their heads to their gods for mockery. In this situation, the three historical factotums returned to their minds for mere moments, but it was suddenly replaced with frenzy, murderous frenzy, not by the malicious control of Messenger, but by the will of the three to fight, to rumble, to kill their mortal enemy. Their surroundings turned to the vision of Red Mountain Vardenfell, where those three once stood to keep the King of Nords from approaching Nerevar, the Hortator, and Dumak Dwarf King. This was the moment they fell, the moment they died to the man's murderous weapon, the moment they finally get to rewrite in history. Wolf Hearth. But the voice they heard was cold, so cold like the long winter. Almost, it continued. And then all the soldiers they have amassed to buy time for Lord Nerevar. Time to convince the dwarves to stop their folly. The man flew towards them, and he shredded their soldiers with blade and voice. He was the storm, if the storm was a man who shatters them and breaks their limbs and hearts. Killing spree. The champions of the Ashlands and the lords of the Velothai Mountains fell to him non-stop. Rampage. He spared none. He killed those he can reach with his great weapon and those he can't reach with his storm words. Dominating. He raged through their ranks and started laughing as he killed more and more. Unstoppable. He towered over them the same way he towered over his enemies through history, the same way he killed the Aldmer at the front of the armies of man, the same way he slew the wild elves of the Heartlands till his hair became red, the same way he conquered the snow elves of Skyrim until they were eaten by the dwarves. Godlike. And when he killed all their armies, he stopped in front of the three, and they all could see him. If not Wolfhearth, then who else is that? And as they wanted to buy just a single second, their metallic limbs failed them, and they crumbled apart against his mighty weapon. Legendary. He raised his hand, and just before the three mechanical things would be withdrawn away, he used telekinesis and ripped the black soul gems from their chests. No! At the sight of that, Galen, the leader of the Clockwork Apostles, shouted and ran toward John, hoping for him to spare those soul gems, but Glymet held him from doing so. Those are the saints. Let me save them. I beg of you. Galen cried. Don't. He'll kill you. Glymet was worried, since the John Dare he sees at the moment is beyond any that he knows. There was no lightheartedness here. He came for destruction, and destruction is what he is committing. This is a man who would strike, and the world would strike with him. One of fate, a champion with destiny, just like how he was. As John held the three black soul gems in one hand, he spoke one word. Glutton. His words caused a messy monster of blood and gore to emerge from his shadow, a monster like none other. Eat. And John fed the three souls of the Dunmare, saints to gluttony. Saint Felms the Bold, Saint Lothus the Pious, Saint Olms the Just. After thousands of years in an artificial state of immortality, John sacrificed the three Dunmare saints to his gluttony. And for the first time, gluttony evolved and came to possess a body of its own, a body that is as large as wrath, as sick as greed, and as ghostly as lust and envy. It was bipedal, yet its arms were almost reaching the ground, and its head was crowned with bloody red tree branches that looked like antlers. This monster was once a leeching root from a briarheart tree, which John was once imprisoned with, and it leached on him like a parasite for long, causing him the hardest time of his life. It evolved to blood ether, a spiritual parasite that fed on anything living, and in the end, it became a monster beyond any abomination created by Messner, a perfect abomination if words were to give it justice. Gluttony, Briarheart vampiric parasite, vampiric gore servant, Briargrove, Wendigo new personification of gluttony. Chapter 687, Clockwork Pickles. Chapter 687, Clockwork Pickles. With the rise of John's own abomination, the battle was facing a drastic change. Gluttony has manifested its own personification in the shape of Wendigo, a creature of horror and nothing but the horror that the look of it would make the innards of the lookers churn in pain and twist in agony. As the creature was let loose on the battlefield, it charged at all the abominations in its way and started to rip their flesh off their mechanical part and add it to its own. It devoured everything without discrimination like a wolf in a flock of sheep. You madman, what have you created? What have you done? Set curses you. Unbearable to the sight of the Clockwork Apostles, their leader Galen rushed at John with a face dampened with tears. Glymet failed to stop him as he was occupied by the abominations that still fought, and so when Galen wanted to clash with John, the latter held him by the neck and raised him as he struggled with the unbelievable power of the choking clutch. Set is dead, John replied. Your false idol can't curse, let alone protect. He shall curse you, Saint Killer. Galen shouted. Huh, John laughed. I like zealots like you, but you are blinding yourself by yourself. John threw Galen off and walked away. The world of Sothasil is a mockery of reality. The divinity of Sothasil is a mockery of true divinity. Even this so-called resurrection is a mockery of creation. I'd argue that Mannimarco has done a better job than Set playing with soul gems and bringing back the dead. To such a statement, Galen couldn't bear what he heard. Haupty, he was about to burst into rage at John, but just as the words were on the tip of his tongue, John was already staring at him with a deep, dark stare. One more breath, and it is the last. No need for words to convey that the dormant survival instinct of the mammals inside the mortal races is enough to interpret the look in John's eyes. All Galen could do was freeze until John looks away and leaves him be. After that, he slowly started to tremble while touching the fortunate neck between his head and shoulders. As for John, he had a personal reason to sacrifice the souls of 3 Dunmary, saints to gluttony. Those 3 were enemies of his ancestors, and he wasn't really keen on letting some ghost with grudges against his own race keep haunting some clockwork war machines. And while it may cause a diplomatic deterioration between him and the Dunmare people, he was sure that no one would believe that some Dunmare heroes from the First Era survived in Black Soul Gems till the 4th Era. Moreover, nowadays opinion about trapping souls in Black Soul Gems is really frowned upon. Thus, if word gets out that Sothasil had 3 saints trapped in soul gems, and John Dare broke those gems, most of those who would hear it would think badly of Sothasil before questioning what John did. Truth is a funny thing. It can be very subjective. As for the current situation, it was almost concluded. John had the assembly line of Messener's abominations destroyed, and beyond it, he uncovered the atrocities he did to the creatures of the Clockwork Realm. Both apostles and fabricants were captured by Messener and subjected to horrid transformations and mechanical implants that were part of some sick crossbreed between alchemy and engineering. Beyond it was a laboratory where Messener seemed to have conducted some experiments and preserved some of his results in cylinder glass tubes filled with green liquids. These were the base forms on which the army of abominations was being constructed. He made people go through this kind of torture? For what? Glymet asked. A mad scientist wouldn't need an excuse to turn their fellow man into jarred pickles. John replied with a long sigh, then let out a short laugh. Imagine it. Pickling people. And as he remarked that, a voice replied with the same amount of mockery John conveyed. Pickling? Please, don't spout such hearsay. It is atrocious. The pickle man himself, Lord of the Clockwork Pickles. John turned in the direction of the voice to see Messner standing alone on a far-off platform where a mad scientist would get a full view of his mad experiment. What you see here is the fruits, pickles, of my excellence in the biomechanical field, Messner said with a mild interruption from John. I have created life forms that go beyond reason, John Dare. You see there, these beautiful creations have their vital organs powered and energized to emit the same level of vitality a living being has. So, they have emotions, feelings, thoughts? Glymet asked. Maybe, John replied. No, I wouldn't do that to them. Messner replied. I am not that monster you are painting me in your head, gentlemen. I am just like your friend here. He uses mortal bodies and Daedric vessels for necromancy all the time. I use them in different ways. I don't mass murder people to raise their corpses. John said. I didn't murder people either. I captured them alive for the purpose of making life forms. I can't grant people life, not yet anyway. Messner replied. And before you all think badly of Mez, your friend John Dare treated his enemies that were bandits, pirates, and dragon cultists much worse than I. I do, John replied. Those who intend to terrorize my people have given me full permission to terrorize them the same way they would do to those innocents I protect. Quit trying to relate your methods with mine. Fine. You're much better and ethical than the filthy me, Lord John Dare. Messner murmured while rolling his eyes. Damn right I am. On the other hand, John crossed his arms and wore an expression of pride on his face. Enough with that. Glymet felt tired of the two. For your crimes, Messner, you shall answer to the people. See what I'm talking about? Messner asked John. That's the kind of attitude that gets people killed. If you have enough power to enforce your laws, you are free to enforce them. As I said, those who intend on terrorizing people have given their permission to be treated less than humans, John said while aiming his staff at Messner. Oh, come on. Messner, however, sneered widely. You really think that the evil wizard would come to face the heroes after you've annihilated his evil army? No one had the time to reply or to expect what was going to happen next. The land started to shake, and a sense of danger started to crawl under everyone's skin or scales, in the case of Swims and Coda. Just as they were about to jump at Messner and try to capture him to get ahead of what disaster he was brewing, the land beneath them collapsed, and a large maw full of fangs and teeth rose from within to swallow them whole. Shockwave. John had a spell ready, and in less than a second, he sent everyone around him as far from the new-coming monster as possible. He alone was in the middle of the attack, and the owner of that large maw attempted to swallow John, who was holding the jaws of the thing with sheer physical strength. Oh, Azra! Lonith recovered from the shockwave and saw the head of the thing that was trying to eat John. The madman. Even Swims that night was stunned by what he saw. What the fuck? John, on the other hand, was trying to figure out the identity of his attacker as he felt immense pressure from the jaw power that thing had. It looked mechanical, the same as anything else in Clockwork City, but it had organic parts just like most fabricants, the animals that dwell in this realm. I promised Set I would create the most perfect life form, something to surpass him, something he can never do. As he felt threatened by my talent, he cast me out of his world. Out there, I felt I could never do it, and even amidst my search for the city, I wasn't confident I would fulfill my promise until I met you, John Dare. You have my short version, please, John said as he was struggling against the thing. Messner didn't notice John was still struggling under the maw's pressure since he didn't have a good angle on that sight. I'd sooner die to this thing before you finish your speech, you long-winded bastard. John cursed. Somebody, give me a TLDR. It's a dragon. Glymet shouted, Clockwork dragon. Added to Discord gallery. Bastard. John managed to muster enough strength to push back the dragon's jaw and jumped as far as he could. Rohe awayer. but the beast that crawled from the earth was right behind him. John jumped and flew off the facility by crashing its window, and the dragon chased him by crashing through the walls and the roof. Above the city, a man levitated in the air, and to boost his speed, he used his incredible leg power to jump from one building to another as the building he came from exploded and a large shadow came from within. Two large wide wings covered the light of the sky as a creature of myth and legend appeared over the legendary city. A dragon made of machinery, skin, and flesh. The apostles looked at the sky as if their world has ended and couldn't breathe from the terror they saw. Even when John looked behind him as he ran, he didn't believe Messenger had created a dragon fabricant, a clockwork dragon. It was mindless, beastly even, programmed with crazed behavior, possessed no Thursday but it was a devastating machine of war. John couldn't fight this thing in the city. The casualties would be too great. He needs to return to the Mire Mechanica and deal with it one-on-one. With one move, Messenger eliminated John from the equation once again and kept him busy outside the brass fortress. But the destruction left behind by the clockwork dragon caused Glymet and the rest to be trapped in the facility, and if not for the help of Ram, they wouldn't be able to clear the debris that blocked the entrance. Shit, everyone all right? Glymet fixed his posture after moving a broken wall with telekinesis and reuniting with his companions. "Where's John?" Loneth asked. Before anyone would answer her question, a tremor was felt through the city, and in the far distance, a tower was toppling as the dragon raced with its prey and attempted to block his way. As the tower fell apart, a mage was seen soaring through the sky, and just as the dragon started to release its artificial dragon breath, the falling part of the tower was sucked into a large portal. Another appeared above the clockwork dragon, and the fallen tower was redirected on the dragon's head. "Let's not ask such questions ever again," Swim said. "Where is Messenger then?" Glymet asked. "Coda thinks he saw them leave in a flash." Coda replied as he was trying to drag out his sledgehammer from beneath a broken wall. "He could be anywhere," Swim said. "To escape this place, we need to deal with him," Glymet said. "We also can't let him cause more suffering than what he already did. I'm allergic to heroism. I think we should put our hand on some treasure and leave." Swim said. "That's what you're thinking about after dragging us with you into this mess." Loneth kicked Swim's leg. Sorry, Loneth." Swims acted childishly around Loneth, but the serious look on their faces made him stop. "Let's move out then. If we head deeper, I'm sure we will find him." Glymet didn't seem to be going ahead with the plan anymore and decided to chase Messenger right to the deepest of the brass fortress. "Wait, we were to use the tools of Kagranak and stop the heart from being exploited. Fighting Messenger head-on is outright crazy." Loneth chased Glymet while saying so. "John still has the tools on him. He's taking the dragon far away by now. We can't waste time, or Messenger will come up with something as annoying as a clockwork dragon," Glymet said as he kept marching ahead. "But we faced a real dragon and won," Loneth retorted. "John will only be delayed for a while. Messenger is counting on that, it seems. He wants us to go after John and rescue him. He's stalling," Glymet replied. His words convinced all the others, but Loneth had a lingering doubt in her heart. "Then, you have a plan?" she asked. "Screw up whatever Messenger is planning. That's a good plan for now." His words made sense, and the group of 5 decided to rush into the Cogitum Centralis, the deepest part of the brass fortress, and where Messenger had fortified himself. They didn't meet any resistance on the way except for a few abominations that didn't even slow them down, and once they entered the Cogitum Centralis, the large commanding facility of this realm, they headed to the deepest chamber, the Inner Curiosity. The place seemed abandoned and trashed, but only when they reached the throne-aligned, Sothasil's seat of power, when they found utterly nothing. "Messenger's not here," Loneth said. "I've searched everywhere." "You think he found the Chamber of the Heart?" Glymet asked. "I don't know." She felt uncomfortable. The memory crystal that showed us how to open it didn't specify its location. It felt rather foreboding how their plan had hit a wall, since their adversary was nowhere to be seen. But if they could get to the Chamber of Lorcan, they would definitely run into him. The Chamber of the Throne, aligned, overlooked the entire brass fortress and had a great vision of what was going outside as well. If there was anywhere to observe the movements of his enemies, Messenger should have been here. This also means that this place is connected everywhere else, and if Sothisil was as vain as the other two members of the tribunals, he should have a chamber of Lorcan near his seat of power, much like how Vivek hanged a meteor in the sky above his palace just to boast. It has to be. It is here. As the group was still starting to look around, Ram seemed to have headed straight to a certain blank wall and touched it with his hand. "Ram, you found it?" Lonith headed towards Ram, but just as she was about to get close, a mechanism was activated and some sort of artificial illusion was dispelled from the wall. In front of them, they saw the gate of a lockbox, much like the Dwemer lockboxes where the dwarves of old hid their most precious belongings. "Incredible!" Glymet exclaimed and walked closer. I didn't feel a hint of magica from that. But as the group gathered around the gate, Ram kept saying the same thing again and again. "It is here. It is here. It is here." So much for the quietest member of the party. The others started to look at him as he was getting agitated second by second. "What's wrong with him?" Swims asked. Ram, friend, Coda tried to get closer to Ram. "It is here." Ram hit the vault door with his two hands, and they suddenly phased in. "Shit, he's unlocking it." Swim shouted. "Stop, Ram." Glymet rushed to hold him. "If you unlock it, Messenger would be able to click," and it clicked loudly. The sound stopped for a second, and everyone looked up. Then a series of clicking cogs started to rotate deep behind the walls. "Oh." Swims was the first to turn back while the others were looking ahead. What they saw ahead of them was an intense red light of something quivering, fueled by tremendous energy. What Swims saw behind was the man they were trying to catch. "Guys," Swims called, and as the others turned back, they could all see the glee on Messenger's face. "At last, once again you have led me to my quarry." Messenger spoke. "My old master ensured I could never break those seals. Thankfully, you have done it for me." Shit. The five were in a bad situation since Ram was about to walk into the chamber for God knows what reason, and Messenger was ambushing them from the back. "Now it is time you witness my true power." As Messenger said so, cracks started to appear on the ground, and the entire floor collapsed. Those who were standing couldn't resist the fall, and beneath them was an unfathomable depth. Oh. Chapter 688, Clockwork Depths. Chapter 688, Clockwork Depths. Hello, Don here. On the 15th of September, 2022, my wedding took place at a local wedding hall near my hometown. I uploaded some photos and a brief of this new phase of life for me. As the Clockwork Dragon chased John outside the brass fortress, and Messenger managed to find a way to the Chamber of Lorcan, where the mechanical heart is, the party of Glymet had fallen into far depths beneath the heart's chamber. Disoriented, disorganized, and disabled, they weren't able to move freely until they reached a stable ground. Still, as they started calling for one another, they found that they have become separate on top of all in these clockwork depths. And speaking of the Clockwork City, one must always remember that it was built by Sothisil, a visionary architect, but on top of all, a scientist. This means that as the creator of a world, Sothisil has built this world with the process of many trials and errors. It is safe to say that beneath the surface of Clockwork City are innumerable leftovers from previous projects that were covered by other projects until it all turned into one titanic multi-layered ruin. This was where Glymet and the other four arrived. Glymet managed to make sure that his surroundings were relatively safe and started to explore everything slowly. He used mage light, candlelight, clairvoyance, and all the spells that can help in this abyssal darkness. The ruins he found himself in seemed to have formed some underground river from some old maintenance pipes. Seeing it meant that either the water came from somewhere or went somewhere. Glymet then used a different set of spells. Sea Stride was always his go-to spell for navigating against the streams, and so he went up the underground river. As he moved from one place to another, Glymet noticed that the upper part of the ruin kept fracturing and collapsing as if he was being haunted by an old architectural curse. If that wasn't the case, the only other possibility is that Messner seemed to have taken control of the mechanical heart of Lorcan and started to reshape Clockwork City. Reshaping a world is a divine act. Talos Stormcrown, Tiber Septim, reshaped the land of Cyrodiil from thick jungles to open meadows. That was the act that proved him as the ninth Imperial Divine. If Messner acquired such power, the mere thought was simply terrifying. There was another idea lurking around Glymet's head as he swam up the river. Recently, he witnessed an Edric ancestral artifact being used, and the power it gave to its user was immense. That was the Eye of Magnus. The Eye of Magnus, the heart of Lorcan, the something of some god. This is not a good sign. John Dare and Loneth were skeptical about the mechanical heart being as almighty as the original heart of Lorcan, but this is not Nirn. This is a different world that can be counted as an independent one. So, what exactly is the heart? Sadly, there's more than one answer, but for that very reason, it is hard to define the heart for what it is. The heart of Lorcan was once the physical heart of Lorcan, the creator god who schemed to create Nirn. It was separated from its owner as punishment for cheating the Edric deities and rendering many of them mortals, but that's just the orthodox answer. The other answers include a stone that was found in the heart of the Red Mountain, the stone of the Red Tower, the source of the tribunal divinity, as well as Dagoth Uar, the core of the engine that powered the mechanical god, the Nemidium, the reason why the dwarves disappeared, etc. It's all nice and dandy, but this begs the most important question of all. What does it do? What is it meant for? And why is it so important to the very fabric of reality? Is it like a control device for existence? Switch it on, you exist. Switch it off, you non-exist. The dwarves did this non-exist pretty well, it seemed. Then there are the rumored dragon breaks, whenever the Nemidium is activated with the heart. Nothing is clear when it comes to the heart of Lorcan anyway. So what about the mechanical heart? Is it the same? And the Eye of Magnus. Enchanting did mention that it had the power to undo existence, and it seemed like a pretty dangerous thing that is awfully similar to the heart of Lorcan in that regard. Fossilized organs of the divines are pretty dangerous, it seems. One wouldn't want to mess with that, especially after what Glymet saw in the eye. His thoughts weren't leading him anywhere, but his recent experience with the Eye of Magnus has taught him one thing. If Messner controls the mechanical heart, just like how Enchanting controlled the eye, a tool to subdue the heart is vitally needed, just like what Alina Dare did with the eye using the Staff of Magnus. John Dare did mention that he is the keeper of the tools of Kagranak, the only thing that can override the control over the original heart. If so, they need to get to John and use the tools to prevent Messner from acquiring any more divine power. Now that was the mentality he needed to move forward. Lucky for him, once he reached a large chamber that was being submerged with water, he ran into a familiar lizard. Glym. Swims at night. The Argonian smuggler was waving at Glymet from the side of the room as he hung to a wall. Fancy meeting you here. A little help here, brother. Swims called. I thought Argonians can breathe underwater, Glymet asked as he used his magic to rise to the surface. I'm perfectly capable of outliving a lot of you underwater, but that's not my current problem. Swims said, then pointed toward a certain direction in the water. Look down there. As Glymet looked, he saw a sight that terrified him. Thanks to the low visibility, he seemed to have skipped that danger while swimming, but now, even he started clinging to walls. There was an entire boarding school of slaughterfish lazily swimming under Swims and seemed more focused on him, so they overlooked Glymet. Clockwork slaughterfish was just like its usual counterpart, a fish with a crocodile-like head filled with razor teeth and a long eel-like body that had a lot of fins. Can you do something about them? Swims asked. I can shock them with lightning spells, but this can barely stun them since those pesky slaughterfish are resistant to shock. Also, if one of ours is nearby, they will get stunned too. Glymet replied. One of ours is nearby, all right. Down there, actually. Swims replied, pointing down at the center of the whirling motion of the slaughterfish. What? Who? Glymet asked with a terrified face. That bastard Ram. Swim said, we ought to leave him. He opened that door for Messenger after all. No, he had his reasons for sure. Glymet said, is there any way to help him out? He's a full metal factotum. How can something like that even swim up for us to help? Swims argued. Then we only need his head. John Dare said that he found a functioning head and assembled it with the rest of the body. Glymet said, yeah, how can we get past the fish, though? Swims asked impatiently. Glymet thought for a second before evoking a lightning rune and casting it on the water. Once the rune exploded, all the slaughterfish were stunned. Glymet and Swims kept watching the fish for a while before it regained consciousness and started moving again. That's about 12 seconds? Swims asked. Yeah, can you reach Ram, bring his head, and swim up in 12 seconds? Glymet asked. With a long sigh, Swims looked at the water and then at Glymet. I guess it's time to live up to my name, Swims said and readied himself. Shock them. Glymet cast another lightning rune that exploded on contact with the fish, and right after, Swims took a straight dive to the depth of the submerging aqueduct. Time passed, 3 seconds, 4, 5, 8, 9. Hurry, Swims, Glymet called. 10 seconds. When the slaughterfish started twitching and moving. 11 seconds. A stream came from the water, and someone jumped out. 12 seconds. The first fish moved, and one jumped from the water, high enough to bite on Swim's tail. Fucking ball. Swims cursed and waved his tail against the chamber wall to hit the fish and cause it to fall. You all right? Glymet asked. I am. His damn fish. Swims cursed as he replied and showed Glymet Ram's head. Got him, he said. He's with us. Glymet asked while trying to see whether Ram is responsive or not. Yo, Tinhead. Swims shook Ram's head to get him to work. Sorry. With an apologetic tone accompanied by a mechanical voice, Ram's voice was heard. Why did you do it, Tinhead? Why did you open the chamber? Swims asked with an irritated voice. Sorry. Ram gave the same reply. Stop it, Swims. He's just a kid. We'll talk with him once this is over. Glymet spoke. Yeah, whatever. Swims lowered a knapsack that was hanging on his back and put Ram's head in it. Once the head entered, it started making a metal rustling noise. What's in there? Glymet asked. Let's say that recovering Ram didn't take much effort, but this was worth the risk. Swims said with a crafty smile. What's it? Glymet asked. A little thing I have my eyes on. Swims said, don't worry, I'll share with you. Sharing is caring. No? Shut up. Glymet retorted in annoyance. Now let's get out of here. Oh yes. Do follow me, good sir. Swims said, I spotted our way out, but you'll need to stun the fish one more time. As the two managed to swim their way out of the submerged aqueduct, they arrived at a large chamber where they magically ran into another two familiar faces. You two are a sight for sore eyes. Lonith walked out to them and extended her staff for them to climb out of the water. Coda's with you? Glymet asked. He's over there, she replied while turning in Coda's direction. The small Argonian appeared at the end of a large hallway of some ruined facility. Lonith seemed to have illuminated the place with magic, and at its end where Coda was, there was a large gate. You can't open it? Glymet asked. It needs a lot of force from two directions. Lonith pointed out. The gate's lock mechanism is based on two pistons here and here. I can use all my power to bring one down, but as soon as I let go, it springs back up. Glymet understood. Hey, Coda, tell Dragon to come out. Swims called out to Coda, who was desperately hanging to one piston. Go away. Coda doesn't want to speak. Coda replied as he struggled with pulling down the piston that didn't even move an inch. What's with him? Swims asked Lonith. He switched through all his personalities, and they all failed to make the piston budge, so it seemed that they have all insulted him, and he's upset about them all. Lonith replied. And Dragon, the behemoth, won? Swims asked. He only comes out and fights. Lonith replied. So let me get this straight. You can pull one down with all your magicka. So this will take the two of us. Glymet asked. Yes, unless you want to rest for a bit first. She replied. I am good. Glymet readied himself. All right, let's do it together. You're on the right, I'm on the left. Lonith said and stood in place. Hey, Coda, come down. Swims called. No, Coda will do it. Coda seemed more stubborn than timid and held onto the piston. Leave him be, Glymet said, and mustered all the magicka within him. With a nod, Lonith and Glymet cast telekinesis and started pulling down the pistons that only corresponded with magic. As the pistons moved, other small pistons started moving inside the chamber ruin, and the gates started opening slowly. I can finally see light. Swims cheered. I'm doing it. Coda's doing it. Coda started shouting as well, wholly unaware that Glymet was the one pulling down the piston. With great effort, Lonith and Glymet finally pulled the pistons to the threshold that trapped them down. As they were done, the two of them sat on the ground from exhaustion. Blessed be the light of Akatosh. Let's get out of here. Swims helped the two tired mages up and urged them to walk. Potion. Lonith offered Glymet her last magicka potion. Thanks. Glymet drank half the amount and returned it to her. As the group started going out of the piston cavern, the gate they opened started to slowly close behind them as the pistons were released from the thresholds, and they were on the path of no return, as if any of them wanted to return to begin with. Still, it was just about time for them to witness what happened to the Clockwork City. Chapter 689, Clockwork Hero. Chapter 689, Clockwork Hero. The Clockwork City was facing a new nightmare, the triumph of Messner. As the new clockwork god, the city was rumbling with his malice and the power of the mechanical heart. The population of the Clockwork City was reduced over the years, and yet thousands still lived here, many of which were ordinary people, and some were the apostles that upheld the laws of Sothis Sil, his last true group of worshippers. Once Messner got the mechanical heart, the lives of those people were bound to face a change far beyond what they ever bargained for. Every piece of machinery in the city turned on the people. Even the factotums that were produced by John were now serving Messner. It is not their commands that were disturbed, but the energy that was powering them now belongs to him, the man sitting on the throne aligned. From outside the city, roars of a clockwork dragon were heard, and roars of thunder came in response as John Dare, the Dragonborn, was fighting alone in an endless fight against a machine that was meant for destruction. After Messner got the heart, the clockwork dragon started to rapidly recover all the damage John managed to inflict on it, and its power multiplied greatly. Now the Savior himself needed saving. But far from the depths of the clockwork world, the five companions rose from the fall they suffered and took a look at the city. The machines of the brass fortress were now let loose on its people, and whenever one was caught, they weren't killed or tortured. No, they faced a fate way worse than death. Assimilation. Assimilation rate 11%. The loudspeakers of the city buzzed with voices whenever the assimilation of the city went up by 1%. When it reaches 100%, the era or Messner will be the new reality of the Clockwork City. We've got to move, Glymet shouted. Now, into that. Swims tried to hold Glymet's arm. Our escape from this city is narrowing by the second. We can't sit idle more than this. With the tools or without them, Messner must be killed. Lonith sided with Glymet. You two are mad. Swims looked all around him, and for the first time, he was afraid. We came for a treasure, GLYM. Yes, Swims. You came for gold and silver. Glymet replied. My treasure, however. Glymet wanted to say something, but he only stole a glance at Lonith, and for a second there, the old man looked so much like his younger self. There wasn't much to say in this dangerous situation. Swims understood Glymet, whereas Lonith was distracted by the danger lurking around them. So, Swims was a little bit at a loss for words. Over there, I'm seeing someone. A survivor. Lonith shouted and ran ahead of them. So, Glymet asked. Nothing. Swims sighed. Don't lose your treasure this time around. At least one of us gets to walk away with something or someone. Swims ran right after Lonith, and Glymet followed after a second of pause. As they reached the survivor, Lonith was blasting away at some factotums, while Swims at night came and started smashing them with a warhammer. Before even Glymet joins, Koda was already into dragon mode and swept away many factotums with his oversized body. Dragon. Smash. As for the survivor who was seen running from the machines. Set. Save us. Protect us. Hear our prayers. Guide and save your people. He started praying as he seemed to have lost all power. Galen. Glymet called the man who was the head of the Clockwork Apostles. Set. Save us, Set. Take away the darkness. Galen refused to turn to Glymet and kept holding on to something with both of his hands and prayed with zeal. Hey! Glymet shook the man from his shoulder and caused him to lose focus on his prayers. Just at that moment, an abomination appeared not too far from them, and as it spotted Galen of all people, it rushed towards him. Aig! Mercy! Only then did Galen lose focus on his prayer and drop on his arse, but with a swift move, Glymet burnt the abominations to ash. As the man was recovering from his shock, Lonith approached the group with an understanding of what was happening. The magicka in this realm is being siphoned by the heart. The apostles seem to have lost their ability to cast their mechanical magic. Soon, it will be our turn, she said. That's terrible. Koda, dragon, said in a dumb voice. It is, Lonith agreed. On top of that, the people of the city, the machines are remaking them. We have to stop this, or else this clockwork dream will turn into oblivion. Thank you, outsiders. Galen stood up with a haggard appearance. Messner is rebuilding the city in his image. More of our people were taken as well to be induced by his twisted ideas. Help us stop him, I beg of you. Anything remaining in the city, aside from the heart, is yours if you manage to do so. The offer was as generous as it can get, but from the looks of it, hope was of short supply at the moment, and a man can even offer his own soul for this scarce commodity. Including this? Swims asked, with his left pointing at something held by the nimble fingers of his right hand. As everyone turned to him, not all of them appreciated the fact that he was gathering riches in this situation, as they all saw a shiny crystal on his right. It was Galen, however, who reacted first. He looked at his own right hand and opened it to see that the item he was just praying with had turned into some common stone from the ground. You! Galen freaked out immediately. Return it. Realizing that Swims switched his star crystal with a stone, he rushed at Swims, or at least tried to rush at him. However, he was held in place by Glymet. That's a memory crystal. Lonith soon realized what Galen had. Please, I beg of you. It is something personal. Return it. Galen extended his hand, asking for the crystal. Personal? Swims asked. Every time we found one of these, we've learned a lot about the history of this feud between Set and Messner, as well as this heart of Lorcan you people made. Please don't. Galen seemed desperate somehow. I'm just wondering if there is another secret that can help us. Swims said. Please. Galen begged more, but it seemed that everyone else was on the same page with Swims. He fished out Ram's head from his bag and flicked on it with his finger. Tinhead, another memory star for you. Swims called. Insert socket. Ram replied as a part of his forehead opened. All right, here we go. Swims put the memory crystal in, and the group found a hidden place to watch the memory. A man appeared on the screen. He was tall, gray-skinned, wearing a white clean robe and many other pieces of brass, such as a belt, a prosthetic arm, and a half-mask covering the right side of his face. Sotha Sil. It seems that the heart has become unstable again. I think if it was left unchecked, it threatens to destroy the whole city. Sotha Sil appeared to be working on something with his mind busy. He was coming and going multiple times in the chamber he was in. No matter the danger, I must venture into the chamber and devise a way to contain its power. The memory started to fast forward on its own and skip days of working and tinkering. I pray to myself that I find a solution to this predicament. The heart I created is wild and mindless. It is a step that I thought my own heart would fulfill on its own, but this newborn heart doesn't understand just yet. I'm not satisfied with anything. While I can't give my heart to it just yet, it needs to be handled like a child first. To think I, who never fathered a child, shall do so now. Vivek would laugh at me if he heard this. Iam would nag me to no end, however. Sothasil's fleeting thoughts slowed down after this, and his voice rang again in his head. A child. He then turned toward a certain door and looked at it for a few seconds with silent thoughts. Immediately, Sothasil's eyes widened. Why didn't I think of that? It's all in there. The answers. Sothasil darted off his seat, and the memories started to accelerate until they reached a certain point where Sothasil was roaming around his lab with a factotum's head in his hand. He then placed a crystal in the head. "Show me what you saw," he said. The memories accelerated for a long while this time, and as they stopped, Sothasil's voice was heard in an excited tone. "Success." He held up his fists. "With these tools that I modeled after the tools of Kagranak, I can control, shape, and even dismantle the heart, if necessary." In front of Sothasil, there were 3 familiar objects: a dagger, a hammer, and a gauntlet. Keening, Sunder, and Wraithguard. Although these are replicas of the real things, I made sure that the energy signature of the heart doesn't resonate with the original tools of Kagranak. These, however, are the only things that can control the mechanical heart. Sothasil spoke in contentment as he patted the factotum head he was still holding. "That's it." Lonith pointed at the displayed projection and turned to Galen. "You didn't want us to find the tools so that we can't destroy the heart. I beg of you, all will be lost." Galen cried. "If the heart is gone, everything would die. It is what powers our machines, grows our crops, and maintains our world." "So, it is life itself?" Glymet asked. "You can say that, but you can't destroy the heart. You mustn't." Galen spoke as calmly as he could while it was clear he was freaking out. "Look around you, man. It's all gone now." Swim said, "Only the living matter. It can be saved, all of it." Galen cried. "You're mad." Swims replied, "You're really mad. Just take us to the tools. Whatever it is, it has to come to an end at some point." Seeing the resolve and sympathy that Swims conveyed, those around were motivated even more to put an end to this madness. Galen looked up to all of them, hoping that at least one could have sided with him. In the end, he had to give up too. "You're right," Galen said. As he stood, steeled his nerves, and strengthened his resolve, Galen pointed towards where the tools are. "We have to go back to Cognitum Centralis, to the throne aligned," he said. "Where Messenger is." Lonith said, "Messenger is with the heart at the inner curiosity. He can't leave it unchecked during the assimilation." Galen said, "We can sneak in and reach the throne aligned. Once we're there, we can harness the throne to access its inner mechanism." Sothasil used the throne as a machine to store his notes and memories. It is the only thing that can lead us to the tools. "And how exactly can we sneak there?" Lonith asked. "Currently, we are hiding at the Caminus Pit. There is no machinery in here, so we are safe for now. Lucky for us, there is a secret passage to the Cognitum Centralis called the Shaft of Sola, not too far from here. I suspect it may be crawling with these abominations, but since no one is there, the assimilation won't be focused on that area, and even if we fight them, we can pass them unnoticed by Messenger." "Are you sure of this information?" Glymet asked. "The shaft was opened around 20 years ago when we were trying to do maintenance work. Even Messenger wouldn't suspect that we were foolish enough to open a back door to the Cognitum Centralis and leave it as it is," Galen said. "And his monsters wouldn't report to him?" Swims asked. "They aren't sentient. Not yet, anyway," Galen said. "Then we go to the shaft," Glymet decided. "This will be our best hope to destroy the heart. May Set forgive us all." Galen lowered his head and murmured in regret. The path to the shaft was mostly quiet as the group moved stealthily without confronting any monster or even saving any clockwork citizen. Once Messenger is defeated, restoration can be possible. Just like Galen said, the Cognitum Centralis had some digging work near its back. The best way to not allow anyone to hide in these parts was to spread some abominations around the dig site, and that is what Messenger seemed to have done. As for the shaft tunnel, it was visible from where the group hid. "This seems like a good opportunity," Glymet said. I'm going in first, and once everything is clear, I'll give you a signal. Loneth and Galen should come first, then Swims and Coda. All right, Loneth nodded. Good luck, Swims whispered. Glymet took in a deep breath and nimbly jumped into the dig site, then started to run a few nimble steps before entering the shaft tunnel. Once he made sure it was clear from danger, he waved out and hid in the tunnel again. Loneth cast Muffle and Invisibility on herself and Galen, then the two walked down the dig site slowly. They could see a few abominations that were once people of this city. Those abominations seemed to have turned into large-headed monstrous beings with metallic limbs and were preying on the dead. The sight almost made them both throw up, but they held it in and ran towards the shaft tunnel. Lastly, it was Coda and Swims at night-night. Swims was nimble just as much as Glymet, if not better. He carried the small-bodied Coda in his arm and jumped on the scaffoldings without making a sound before landing like a caveat. He then started to move slowly and carefully before attempting to dart into the shadow of the shaft tunnel. But just then and there, disaster struck. Above the entrance of the tunnel was an abomination that seemed to have watched it all from the beginning. A chameleon-like abomination with a large snake head and skin that can take the appearance of the surface it stands on. Swims' senses screamed at him just as he was at the range of danger and by pure instinct. He tossed Coda into the tunnel and lounged to the side. Where he was just now was a pool of acidic spit, and the abomination that was aiming for him made itself visible at last. Swims. Stealth was usually overrated, and in this situation, Glymet and Loneth found no leeway other than to jump out and help their friend. With a swift cantrip, Loneth pushed the abominations far from Swims and made it land awkwardly. With a clean slice, Glymet beheaded the fallen monster. Shit! Swims recovered immediately and looked around him with wide eyes and a dry mouth. He took his spear and tossed it at the nearest abomination, then took out his saber and cut the one after it. To the tunnel, quickly. Glymet tried to pull Swims from the strap of his belt. Once we go in there, they'll flood after us. Swims said, I'll buy time. You block the tunnel. No, you'll die. Loneth shouted at him. And you all won't. Swims replied as he spotted two more abominations rushing at them on their arms and legs. I'll hold them off. Loneth stepped forward, but the moment that she did, Swims hit her head with the pommel of his saber. What are you doing? Glymet's eyes widened. Without any resistance, Loneth collapsed to her knees. Swims immediately carried her and tossed her on Glymet's shoulder. Go. Now. Go. Wait. We can do this. I said go. Swims turned and slashed two monsters before pushing Glymet into the tunnel and retreating. He then took off his large bag, tossed Ram's head to Coda, and then took out something else. I always wanted to try this one out. In his hand, Swims had the Gatling cannon which Ram used before. Swims. Hey. Swims at night turned his back to Glymet and aimed up the Gatling cannon. Never expected to die a hero. And with a smile, you lot better make this count. Swims at night had come to the Clockwork City seeking its riches. But in the end, he gave his life in the hopes of saving it, or at least of protecting his friends. With a buzzing hail of Gatling fire, shrieks of maddened monsters, and shouts of glory, Swims at night died a clockwork hero. If the entire Clockwork City was assimilated by the power of the mechanical heart, he would rather be somewhere in the hells of oblivion rather than under the mercy of the new clockwork god. In his heart, John Dare was praying for Glymet and the others without knowing what else to do, which takes us to Glymet, the forgotten hero whose path put him in the direst of all situations. He had to watch a friend sacrifice himself for the sake of the rest of the party. Swims at night stood tall after he knocked out Loneth and told Glymet to take her and run into the shaft tunnel. Glymet didn't want to. He had his sword in his hand and wanted to assist Swims against the impossible odds, but just as he entered the fray, he was overwhelmed in both power and magic. The monsters that gathered were only getting bigger and bigger. They were more resistant to magicka and unharmable by blades. Only Swims was able to stand his ground with the Gatling cannon, and he was being surrounded. Swims, come here. Don't go in there. No matter what Glymet said, Swims didn't hear anything. It may have been the loud noises of the Gatling cannon or the unending shrieks of the dying monsters, but there was nothing Glymet could do. As he stood at the entrance of the shaft tunnel, and suddenly, he was being swallowed by its darkness. He could only hear the voice of Swims roaring with the weapon in his hand against the monsters, and in the end, the tunnel he was swallowed into was blocked by a rolling stone, and it was darkness. The sensation drove Glymet off his sleep with his eyes wide open. Glym, you're good? Lonith's voice came from his side, and her arms surrounded him in her embrace. His eyes were still fixed on the site in front of him where the tunnel's entrance was blocked. I had to put you down when you tried to open the tunnel. I apologize for doing so. On the other hand, Galen stepped towards Glymet and apologized to him since he seemed the one responsible for Glymet's nap. How much time passed? Glymet asked in a tone void of sensation. An hour, replied Galen. An hour has passed since the death of Swims at night. Glymet wanted to return to Swims and attempted to open the tunnel, which Coda and Galen had sealed, but they had to put him down before his irrational actions would have endangered them all. Swims at night knew what was important and accepted his fate. There was no turning back from that, and he chose the heroic way out. We survived this, and I promise you, the outsider Swims at night will be forever revered by the masses of the Clockwork City as a martyr and a saint, said Galen while trying to comfort Glymet. An hour has passed, Glymet replied. How many of the masses do you think have survived? While Galen wanted to give Glymet some comfort, Glymet gave Galen a reality slap. He stood up and got away from Lonith. Let's push forward. That was all he said as he picked his weapon up and marched ahead. Glym, wait. Lonith tried to stop him, but he only stopped to reply. An hour has passed, Lonith. We need to hurry, he said and moved again. Following Glymet was Coda, who installed Ram's head on his shoulder guard and jumped ahead of Glymet. Look, hey, Coda is twin-headed now. Twin-headed Coda. In an attempt to cheer Glymet up, Coda acted a bit funny, but he only got his head patted as Glymet passed and didn't forget to pat Ram's head as well. Sigh. Embarrassment. The powerless Ram commented as he hung from Coda's shoulder. The party traversed the underground tunnels of the Cogitum Centralis. They reached a few hatches where they could climb into the main halls of the place. Galen navigated through the tunnel until he reached a place not too far from the chamber of the throne aligned. From that spot, he climbed up followed by the others, and they all made sure that their surroundings were clear, especially from anything hidden by magical means. As they dodged all dangers and traps, they entered the chamber of the throne aligned, and there was nothing there but the throne. From that point, Galen started explaining what to do. This is the throne aligned, one of Sothis Sil's unending marvels, Galen said and stood in front of the so-called throne. It was nothing but a small platform with two tablets that were elevated up to the eyesight level of the user of this throne. One could see many mystical symbols on them, some of which are barely recognizable from magic casters. Sothis Sil stored much of his thoughts and notes in this machine, but it is deadly for a mortal to access it. Galen finally added, Step aside then, said Glymet as he stepped on the platform between the two tablets. I will use this thing. I said it is dangerous for mortals. Moreover, you should know what you're looking for. Galen said, Coda. Glymet ignored Galen and called Coda. Give me Ram's head, please. Per his request, Coda reluctantly took Ram's head off his shoulder guard and handed it to Glymet, and returned to Lonith's side with a depressed expression as he now had returned to being the single-headed Coda. What are you doing with that? Galen asked. In the memories of Sothis Sil, he was using a factotum's head to access some of his complicated machines. Glymet mumbled quietly. Yes, but that was a specific factotum head. Not just any factotum can do it. Galen walked to Glymet and insisted. Wait, Lonith called Galen out. Then what about a factotum that opened the chamber of Lorcan by itself? Now that they have come to this, it seemed that this particular matter was finally discussed. Wait, What? And now even Galen was alerted to that fact as well. You mean that the thing that opened the chamber for Messenger was that damn thing? And in a burst of rage and disbelief, impossible. It happened. Loneth insisted. Then it is one of Messenger's tools. Galen shouted, his mole machine. No, wait. John was the one who discovered Ram. He had a different theory than that, but let's focus on what we know. The chamber of Lorcan was sealed by a very complicated magic. Not magic, Galen refuted. None of the apostles could open it for years. It needed a level of sophistication and power only Sothasil was capable of. A factotum can't do it. Unless, Loneth asked. Unless, Galen thought, this level of clockwork technology is beyond me even. Either it is a key to open the chamber, or, well, the other way to open this kind of chamber is to be on the inside, but he opened it from the outside, right? He did. Loneth nodded. To be honest, why would Sothasil seal the mechanical heart away and make such a sloppy mistake by creating a key? It is not like him at all. Galen insisted. Even with that conversation going on, Glymet wasn't wasting any time and had already managed to connect Ram to the throne aligned. Can you find the replicated tools? Glymet asked. I am warning you. Don't act rogue as you did with the chamber. Information acquired. Ram replied, tools located. In 3, 2, 1. It can access the throne aligned. Galen looked at Ram's head and was at loss for words. The mystery about Ram became even more mysterious than when it started, and this last twist meant that there is more to him than just being a personality construct installed on a factotum. But for now, Glymet was more focused on the results Ram can achieve rather than finding out who he really is. That can be left after the disaster for the nerdy members of the group. As Ram extracted information on the location of the tools, 3 portals opened around the throne aligned, and from their reflections, Loneth could tell where they could lead and how they function. Each portal can take one person out and remain for him to return. One leads to Skyrim, one leads to High Rock, and the other to some underground place that I can't pinpoint. She said. So he hid them outside his realm. Glymet said, each one of us should take a portal, and Galen wanted to suggest something, but Glymet interrupted. No, he said, I'll go through each one of them one by one. GLYM. That may prove dangerous. Loneth retorted. I can do it. Whatever it is, if I am alone, nothing will stop me. Glymet insisted and moved towards the first portal. Or we can escape. Loneth then added. What? Galen reacted with shock all over his face. After we came this far, we will not. Glymet spoke. Swims will be avenged. Loneth felt guilty about what she said, but she was sure of it. If they were to use these portals and leave this hellish realm, they will manage to survive. Messenger won't chase them out of his domain. Glymet can't be swayed at this point, and since he is hellbent on avenging Swims at night, he shall get his revenge. And for that, Glymet stepped into the first of the 3 portals to acquire the replicas of the tools of Kagranak. Chapter 691, Clockwork Tools. Chapter 691, Clockwork Tools. 3 portals. Each one leads to one of the tools of Sothasil. Each one will be obtained with great difficulty. After he stepped into the first portal, Glymet found himself in utter darkness. He didn't realize he was done with teleporting yet until it took a little bit too long for any sort of light to come to interact with his eyes. Glymet didn't cast a spell, but he rather held the hilt of his sword and drew it out rapidly. The movement of his blade drew an instant fiery line that thinned out in the air and calmly started to flicker around the blade as it shed its light on the surroundings. A tomb, a crypt maybe, or an old catacomb. Glymet's movements just now caused something to break, and without any resistance, 3 skeletons crumbled to the ground. The battle-hardened senses of Glymet were so heightened to the point where even if he can't see it, he knows where danger looms from and acts upon it. Then why didn't this sense work during that time when they were sneaking into the tunnel shaft? Well, that's what is currently plaguing his mind. Was it carelessness? Was it bad luck? Or was it something else? These thoughts were so loud in Glymit's head that just to fight them, he was running around in the ancient tomb and hunting down the undead, which caused them to rattle and shriek loud enough to keep him focused on his quest. He was now all alone. He knew the benefits of being alone and preferred it this way. He can't be hindered anymore, and there is no one to lose but his own self, a self he rarely cares about saving or losing. His ancient, dull brain haunted him, and he ran from it. His limbs flurried around as he fought a horde of undead, as if he was being chased by a greater evil, and once all the skeletons were put down, he found himself standing in front of an elder vampire. The vampire said something, but little did Glymit care. The moment he started the fight with the vampire, Glymit returned to the rhythm of battle and let himself be battle-drunk until he slew his enemy. That was fast. It took him less than an hour, and he immediately found the treasure hidden in that crypt, Sotha Sil's version of Wraithguard. He took it, then he returned to the Chamber of the Throne, aligned via the portal. Back there, it seemed that the group was still waiting for him, and Loneth had worked on hiding their activities with magic, so no abomination creature would easily notice them. Without saying much, Glymit handed the Wraithguard to Galen and took the second portal. That one led him to an unexpected yet familiar location. Skyrim, East March. Not too far from Windhelm, in the southern area down in the shadow of the Snow Throat Mountain. As he looked left and right, volleys of arrows and bolts of magic started flying sideways in both directions. Just as he managed to take cover and find a safe spot, the sound of marching steps and rustling armors reached his ears, and he could see a full battalion of legionaries matching against the rain of arrows. Tagging behind them was a large score of Imperial Legion archers who were split into smaller formations that would keep going ahead and retreating behind the cover of the Legion shield wall. The formation that would go ahead would shoot their arrows, and the one that retreats would ready the next volley. On the right and left flanks were two Imperial Cataphract Cavalier formations that would charge with their armored horses against the Stormcloak infantry formations and would keep the Nordic skirmishers at bay. On the other side where the Nords gathered, they had the high ground advantage, and the largest mass of their forces were longbow archers that positioned themselves on top of the hill that led to their camp. The Stormcloak archers had an overwhelming advantage against the legionaries and the other archers, but the Nordic infantry found it impossible to descend from the hill and face the enemy on even ground. Even though they would be outnumbered and exposed to the Imperial battle mages that are mixed within the legionary shield wall, they would still hold their ground against the cataphracts that posed danger to their archer advantage. The Nordic commander seemed to be a cunning one, as he used half of his infantry troops and created a shield wall at the road leading up the hill. He even sent 3 patches of spearmen to form 3 points of cavalry kill zones, known as the hedgehog formations. These hedgehogs would use their round shields like shells and their spears like stingers. They managed to deal some damage whenever the cataphracts tried to get past them and dropped a few horsemen with ease. The Imperial commander's only hope was to put his legionaries in a direct confrontation with the Nordic spearmen, but he was terrified of the impending danger of Nordic tongues. While the Imperial Legion had its exceptional battle mages, the Nordic clans have produced many tongues that would speak the words of power and cause bursts of destruction among the Imperial Legion with their draconic Thursdayum, a power that proved to be the backbone of many Stormcloak strategies. While the Thursdayum wasn't fully exclusive to Nords, only they knew its secrets, and the Dragonborn was a fine example of what the Thursdayum can do if it was mixed with the blessings of the divine Akatosh. But while the Nordic tongues were a bit rare, the Imperial battle mages were numerous, and they overwhelmed the Nords many times with their magic. Still, this situation is turning into a deadlock on both sides. Neither the Imperial impressive formations nor the Nordic terrain advantage gave them the edge they needed. It was very obvious that one side would need just the advantage of a single talent that can tilt the battle to their favor. This talent would surely be an exceptional soldier or a powerful hero, but neither side had it yet. Glymit realized that, and by no means he was willing to be the hero for either side. That's not his role or his fight. He was done fighting the wars of the misguided mankind. All he needed was to win one last fight and fully retire without looking back. As he read the motions of the battle, Glymet found the truth behind many questions that loomed in his mind, and he wanted to express all of them. He carried a sad expression on his face and started walking towards the battle with his sword still placed in its sheath. He passed many fallen soldiers from the two sides, and as he looked at them, he remembered the old days of the Great War, the nightmare which reshaped his life to this day. As the battle continued and the Imperial cataphracts closed on the Stormcloak shield wall in an attempt to break it, the arrows repelled them back for another failed attempt. It was then when a Legion Knight rode by Glymet while he was regrouping with the cavalry formation. "Civilian," the knight called, "move out of this place or you'll be caught in the fight." Glymet indeed looked like a civilian. Despite having a single sword dangling from his side, he was wearing light traveling gear, something that people don't wear in battles. He also wasn't a Nord from his general looks, so by default he wasn't a Stormcloak. But he can be. "Civilian," the knight called again when Glymet ignored the first call and seemed to be frustrated by the uncooperative civilian. Glymet walked towards the Stormcloak shield wall, and as he passed the hedgehog formations, the Stormcloak soldiers started to notice him. One couldn't tell if he was an Imperial or something else, but to the besieged Nords, it was all bad news. Around 11 arrows flew towards him from the direction of the archers above the hill. Glymet felt the sharpness of the arrows in the air and stood his ground. He didn't seem to be concerned for his own safety, and just as he felt the sharpness of the arrows at the point where dodging had become impossible, the sharpness suddenly disappeared. All the arrows landed on the ground behind him, and he remained as he was, unharmed and in a straight path towards the shield wall. As he reached the shield wall, the spearmen raised their weapons and aimed them up across the entire formation. This wasn't just for anticipation against the weird hooded man, but also for the cataphracts that were turning and rushing once again at the shield wall's left flank. Seeing this strange man standing in the middle of it all, there wasn't much they could do about it now. Many innocents get caught in the war because of their stupidity. It wasn't the first time they saw it. Just the other day, an apothecary from Rift Inn threw herself in the crossfire between two armies looking for the body of her son. But the story of this man was going to be different from this point onward. It was going to change everything regarding this battle with a single word. Not a word of power like the Thursday but rather something different, something filled with authority. Enough! Just as the Imperial cataphracts closed onto the shield wall and the Nords aimed their pikes to intercept them, Glymet uttered a single word. He didn't shout it. He just spoke out in a voice a tad above the normal. Immediately, all the Imperial cataphracts changed the direction of their horses, and the Nords started peeking through the shield wall. In a strange feeling, all the power, the fear, the adrenaline, the rage, and the will to sacrifice oneself all have suddenly disappeared. Enough was enough. A single command stopped everything. Miraculously, the Nordic commander started breaking his shield wall and walked out of it while the Imperial commander redirected his horse and rode ahead to the cataphracts in the direction of Glymet as well. As the two commanders reached each other where Glymet stood, they exchanged looks and nodded to one another. Ivar Bearbiter and Arcton Veds were the two men respectively, two old Legion veterans of the Great War. The two exchanged words with Glymet and then decided to retreat immediately. They agreed to continue fighting another day. No one could fathom what just happened, but all of them had just lost the will to fight and really couldn't think about it now. They all wanted to go back and rest for the day. How so? It was only explained later that a handful of Imperials who possess the unique traits of leadership can speak the word in the voice of the Emperor. While it is similar to the Nordic war cry and the Red Guard adrenaline rush, it is as rare as the Breton dragonskin, all of which are racial powers that transcend the normal traits of one's race. Glymet just used that, and an entire battle came to a halt. Many of the injured were picked from the battlefield by the two sides, and their survival chances were somewhat guaranteed. As for Glymet, he dug something out somewhere near the hill and disappeared from the place. Once he walked back into the Clockwork City via the portal, he handed out the second tool to Loneth, Sothisil's version of the mighty Hammer Sunder. The last portal led to the Gerald Mountains, the mountain range that separates Skyrim and Cyrodiil. There, he arrived at a famous landmark known as the Dragonclaw Rock. Just as the namesake stated, a dragon was looming above the sky where Glymit's portal opened, and the two noticed each other clearly. The last time Glymit fought a dragon, it took him days, and he was exhausted beyond sense. Now, he is in front of another one of those mighty beings. "I've come in peace," Glymit said, and moved his hand away from the blade. Dremyalok, the dragon descended upon the rock and greeted Glymit. "I suppose this is greetings. Then, greetings to you too, Ancient One." Glymit replied. "You speak to a Dova, a dragon, rather than running around like the other Jor. Sanzik, peculiar." The dragon spoke in the heaven-shaking voice of his race, mixing Thursdayum with common speech. "I have only come for a minor errand." Glymit replied, "My body is too tired to fight, but I know I can always keep fighting. It seems that is something I haven't figured out how to quit just yet." "Brah, indeed, Jor of your kind always squabbles over the little nern you were given. True on every nern I have seen. Criff, fighting," the dragon replied, but he soon changed his lamenting tone. "I have no wish to fight you, Jor, but this is my gar, my sanctuary. You have invaded it with your feet, and I find myself, Asan, at a loss of what to do." "Have you never had guests before?" Glymit asked. "Parthernax every 100 years or so," the dragon replied. "Lately, the other Dav were in dismay against Borma, father, when he had given birth to a Dovakian. I have had more guests than what I would wish for since then." "Sounds like your kind of trouble," Glymit said, and immediately went to the issue at hand. "My query shouldn't be that much of a bother to you then." "Then speak, Jor. What is it that would bring you from that portal into the home of a Dova?" the dragon asked. "A few years ago, maybe over 200 years, a great wizard came to this location, and he hid something, a dagger, I assume." Glymit explained, "I am in need of that thing." "Sothara," the dragon said in realization before explaining the words. "Sothis Sil. That's him," Glymit confirmed. "While not a path I wish for a Jor to follow, Sotha Ra is a Turdan, a wise man. He and I made a pact that I would safekeep his treasured knife. Its power hums with a dangerous shriek that can make the world." The dragon searched for the word in his head before finding the right term. "Krull." "Meaning?" Glymit asked. "Mourn," the dragon replied. Thus it was called keening. Glymit shared his insights on the artifact. "It would seem you know what it does, and here I thought myself to be the most knowledgeable of all Seek, of all synonyms." The dragon seemed to have been satisfied with the conversation and backed off. "You can find it up on the highest peak if you follow the road." "Thank you, Ancient One." Glymit bowed his head slightly. "What should I call you?" "I am Vunenval, the exalted tongue of the Greybeards, and a follower of Parthernax," the dragon replied, then said, "It goes both ways when we exchange our names. Glymit. It wasn't always Glymit, but it is the name that brought me good fortune." Glymit replied, "It wasn't always Vunenval either, but it was the name that brought me peace of heart." Vunenval replied, "Fare thee well, Glymit." "Yes, may we see each other in the future," Glymit said as the dragon started soaring in the sky. But the dragon left Glymit with one last reply as he headed east. "That won't be." Chapter 692, Clockwork Fate. Chapter 692, Clockwork Fate. Glymit returned with Sothisil's version of keening in a faster time compared to the other two. As he arrived, he was met with the face of the concerned Loneth. "You've brought the last of the tools?" she asked. "That I did," Glymit replied with a faint smile. "I shall now carry the three. The replicas of Sunder, Keening, and Wraithguard, the three legendary artifacts known as the Tools of Kagranak. These ones, however, were made by Sothis Sil. In terms of power, they are as strong as Kagranak's creations, but as Galen stated, they have a different tonal signature that is unique to Sothis Sil's mechanical heart. The gauntlet Wraithguard was a single right-hand gauntlet, and it was required to wield the other two tools without harming the user. This meant that Glymet can only use the hammer sunder and the dagger keening one at a time. Topically, these tools weren't really designed for combat purposes, but despite that, they were really good at it. The only problem Glymet could think of was their short reach. You seem to be in a better mood. Any news? Loneth asked. Glymet told Loneth about his 3 encounters. The vampire lord in the old crypt, the battle in Eastmarch, and the dragon of the Jarrow Mountains. While the first 2 encounters were as bleak as how Glymet felt after losing swims at night, the last encounter with the dragon changed how he felt greatly, and the view of one of the highest peaks in that mountain range gave him strength and solace. He felt like he can do it now. He can face Messner and exact vengeance for the death of Swims. Around him were Loneth, Galen, Coda, and Ram, who returned to Coda's shoulder piece in a brand new unification that is stronger than ever before. So this is all of them, Loneth said as she gazed at the final pieces of the puzzle. They are, Glymet replied. We came to this world looking for Swims. We ran into Jonrad's son, made friends, fought enemies, and now we're trying to save a world. Sound a lot like you, she said with a smile before asking. After this, any sort of mischief you're planning for? Glymet laughed. I'm not sure much about what comes after this, Glymet said and fetched out a large and unique coin from his pocket. At Rift Inn, Swims, and I met his sister, and she offered me a place on her ship. She sails east to the Dragon Isles. The Patamaic? Loneth asked in wonder, towards Akavir. Indeed, Glymet nodded. I have wandered every piece of land on the face of Tamriel, and everywhere I go, peace wasn't written for me. Maybe out there in the high seas, I can find a simpler, easier life. Retiring? Loneth uttered the word with a sense of fascination. I can always do it for a little retirement, too. Glymet heard those words, and he didn't get startled in his heart the same as he always does around her. He was rather relieved and happy. This time, he won't push away happiness. He has to pursue it and be selfish like how Swims at Night told him. He has to treasure happiness, treasure her. I'm glad you decided that. Glymet smiled at her and felt content about it. So, Loneth had to break the mood and get serious. We find Messner and destroy the heart. Her question was valid. This is the end, and it has to be proper. No, but there was a voice that hastily interrupted their conversation. Galen, the Clockwork Chief Apostle, ran to Glymet and landed on his knees. You can't destroy the heart, he pleaded. Its power is what has allowed our crops to grow, our machinery to run. Please. He then started to negotiate. There must be another way. Perhaps you can use the heart instead. What? Are you mad? Loneth lashed out against Galen. She then turned to Glymet. I doubt that you can use it. Such a thing will overwhelm you, as it clearly has overwhelmed Messner's mind. I don't plan to let it overwhelm me. Glymet said confidently, and turned around, looking towards the route to the chamber of Lorcan. If I'm not wrong, Messner is where the heart is. He can't leave it alone at this crucial moment. Before anyone could project their opinions, he stepped forward. Let's go. The chamber of Lorcan wasn't far beyond the chamber of the throne, a line from where Ram had once opened the seal. From that point, the group was faced with minimal resistance, as if Messner wasn't minding his own security. Every abomination they encountered, they would always hear them mumbling the same words. Messner's will must be obeyed. Messner's will must be obeyed. It was as if Messner was obsessed with absolute obedience and passed down his programming to all the abomination to recite those sick lines. Just as the group was done dealing with the last of the horde, they took a short rest before invading the Chamber of the Heart. The lighting in the Chamber of Lorcan was dim, so dim that Glymet felt how unnatural it was, and so he ignited the fire aura that surrounded Goldbrand to shed light on the area around him. Leoneth cast a stronger version of Mage Light, and Galen used his staff to create a large area of luminance. At that time, a voice spoke from deep within the chamber. I knew you'd come. The voice echoed all across the chamber, which cloaked the location of the speaker, but he didn't seem to be intending on hiding himself. As a faint red glow started to lighten up the chamber, the group looked up, and they saw a man floating above them all. The red glow that was growing more intense with every passing second appeared to be the living, beating mechanical heart that was somehow masked from their detection and raised as high as the ceiling of the chamber. "Messenger, we've come for you." Glimmet called Messenger out. "This madness has to end." "Why?" Messenger asked. "Why do you call it madness? You're seriously asking that?" Lonith couldn't bear what she heard. "Don't you see? The change, the power, the results? Living beings are being made, given the power to evolve, to be better with every passing second, to assimilate with divinity." Messenger spoke his thoughts. "Last time someone tried to do that, they spread a plague that almost annihilated Morrowind." Glimmet replied, mentioning the events of the Corpus Plague that once struck Morrowind 200 years ago by the plot of Daggeth UR. "Yes, I witnessed it firsthand," Messenger replied. "Unfortunately for you, there's no unwavering to stop me this time, and even the Dragonborn you brought with you is kept occupied. His fate is not to cross mine." Messenger spoke with pride. "Dragonborn?" Glimmet asked with narrowed eyes. "He means John," Lonith said. Glimmet was surprised to hear that John is the Dragonborn, but for some reason, it started to make sense in some weird way. Still, that wasn't something he should focus on right now. "That doesn't mean we can't bring you down," Glimmet said, and had Keening ready under his garment. "I see." Messenger sighed and continued speaking. "At least something good will come out of this, for I have prepared a surprise, just for you." "A surprise?" An ominous feeling started to creep around the group, but they didn't seem anxious. Whatever it is, they can overcome it. "Messengers must be obeyed." At that time, a voice started to creep closer to them. Those same words were said by all the abominations Messenger has created so far, and the source can't be anything different. But this voice was familiar, awfully familiar. "Messengers will." "No," Lonith cried. Glimmet's eyes widened. "Must be obeyed." On the other hand, Messenger laughed out, loud and proud. "For years, I have modified the living to make the strongest man-machines," Messenger said before introducing his newest abomination. "But with my newfound power, I've found the dead just as malleable." The dead? That undead has put a lot of psychological weight on Lonith and Glimmet. "Swims at night." "Messenger," Lonith shouted, "you'll answer for what you've done to him. A god answers to no one." However, Messenger gave a haughty reply. Seeing their friend, Swims at night, torn apart and put back as a mechanical abomination powered with necromancy, Lonith and Glimmet were horrified by what they saw, yet, as much as Lonith was enraged, Glimmet was able to pull himself back to his senses. "Play mind games?" Glimmet asked. "You're afraid. A god? Afraid?" Messenger's expression became twisted rather than carrying his usual attitude of mockery. "Put Swims to rest." Glimmet gave an order to his group. "I'll keep that one busy. Come at me." Messenger responded, and the fight kicked off. There wasn't much to fight. While the union of Lonith, Coda, and Gallon started to overwhelm the Ray's Swims at night, Messenger was completely dominating the fight against Glimmet. Just like how John Dare once wiped the ground with 10 elven archwizards during the Battle of Winterhold when he activated God Mode, Messenger was on that level of power, if not higher. Being a demigod, Messenger had nigh limitless access to energy directly from the world. What he was doing wasn't magic, but rather ordering the laws of reality to take shape. He ordered the fire to ignite and explode. He ordered the air to turn cold and blast his enemy. And he ordered the electricity to form and shock his opponent. While Messenger was enjoying his power, Glimmet was patiently defending against those attacks with tenacity and grit. He had a secret tool under his sleeve that saved his life more than what he could count just in those few seconds. The Gauntlet Wraithguard. Wraithguard can protect the user from the wild energy of the Heart of Lorcan. This alone can defend against some of the strongest kinds of magic. If not for it, Glimmet wouldn't have lasted this long, and lucky for him, Messenger seemed to be oblivious about it. Just as he was about to be cornered badly, Glimmet heard a voice not too far behind him. "We've dealt with Swims," Lonith shouted. "It's your turn." Glimmet shouted, "Finally!" in his head and immediately dashed away from Messenger. Huh? Escaping? Messenger was dumbfounded by the opponent that immediately gave him his back, but just as he was about to end Glimmet, something jumped in the way. Dragon. Smash! Dragon. Coda jumped in the way with his shield radiating with dangerous energy. Just as Messenger's attack landed, a big explosion happened and Dragon was pushed back. He didn't get harmed, however, thanks to his newest installation. On Dragon's left shoulder was Ram's head. While being completely bodiless, Ram still had the power to cast some incredible type of magic that imbued Coda's weapons with transcendent powers. Just like that, Dragon 2.0, aka Twin-Headed Dragon, stepped up to face Messenger. "Get off my way, damn lizard." Messenger wasn't impressed by the power of Dragon and Ram, as he seemed to have decided to overlook and shoo them away with a minor attack. But just as he did so, his head was attacked by a spell cast by Lonith. "Annoying pest. All of you shall die." Messenger wanted to lash out, but just as he turned, he noticed that Glimmet was climbing the stairs around the chamber, which were leading up towards the Heart's platform. "Out of my way!" He blasted through Lonith and Dragon and immediately chased after Glimmet, who was only halfway towards the Heart. The only one who could interrupt him now was Galen. "Messenger, in the name of our master, I shall stop you," Galen shouted as he raised his staff above his head. "Galen, you damn weasel. The only master here is I." Messenger was enraged and tried to anticipate which pattern Galen would use to attack out of habit, but what he didn't expect was what Galen did. Instead of conjuring an element and casting it towards Messenger, Galen sent a clockwork glyph through the floor and the walls of the chamber all the way to Glimmet up there. Once the glyph reached him, it exploded without any harmful effect, but the blast carried Glimmet from his location to the upper platform in an instant. Curses! Messenger wasn't pleased with what he saw and instantly teleported up to the platform, blocking the way of Glimmet. "You shall not pass." As he said so, he raised his mechanical arm and attempted to smite Glimmet with its menacing brass claws. Messenger's attack was precise and powerful, way more powerful than his previous self as a wizard. Just as the attack landed on Glimmet, it cut through him without any resistance. It was so powerful that it felt like he was cutting through the air, and he was. A look of smugness appeared on Messenger's face as he was about to announce his victory. The look on his face changed as the image of Glimmet in front of him disappeared into thin air. He looked behind him, and there he was. Glimmet stood just an arm's length away from the mechanical heart. Messenger couldn't even feel him. What? How? Messenger couldn't fathom what sort of illusion was cast that was powerful enough to fool him, the new clockwork god. "Now, use the heart to beat him. Fight him as a fellow god," Galen shouted. "No. It is too dangerous. If you can't handle it, you'll fall, and Messenger won't. Destroy it," Lonith shouted. "Those are the risks we have to take. Without the heart, my people will die." Galen argued with Lonith. Swims didn't sacrifice himself for more of his friends to die. How could you ask him to die for your own people? Lonith pushed Galen away with anger. Be selfish, survive, attain victory. Be selfless, sacrifice for the ultimate good. Those were the two choices Glimmet had. Still, his choice was swift. With the hammer sunder in his right hand, Glimmet struck the mechanical heart. "Tying! No!" Messenger screamed, tried to hold out his hand, but it was too much for him to endure, and he collapsed on one knee while holding his head in pain. Galen's face went paler than what it already was, and almost dropped to his knees. The power of the heart vibrated through the clockwork city, and as the raging abominations were about to smash, eat, kill, and devastate, they all dropped down just like their master. Tying! The second hit made it all worse for those who were affected by the power of the heart, yet this time, the compartments of the mechanical heart started to burst open. Tying! By the third strike, a hole was open on the shell of the heart, and it was large enough for a child to pass through. Except for the bright radiation that was emitted from within, One could still sense a deep and strong red crystal hanging against the etheric structure of the eight-sided pivot. It was as red as Kimiel Adabel, but it wasn't as refined or blessed. It was power, raw, and simple. By the clever crafts of Sothis Sil, he seemed to have made this stone the pivotal pillar of the transcendent of his mechanical heart. Another Lorcanian trace it may seem, and its might, without even beginning to describe, is no joke. Glymet knew what he had to do, and his hammer began to swing again, this time at the center stone. His heart was racing with determination and fighting spirit, and he understood that past this point is the death of all things clockwork. But what is to more at this point? This world will die, and as most of its citizens were already assimilated into the forms of abominations, and there was no going back. But just as Sunder was about to strike the center stone, the red glow of the power of the core took the initiative and reached out to Glymet. Several arms of the glow flowed around him, and they all embraced him gently, with no intention of any malicious harm. He realized it just a second from striking the core, and as the realization hit him, he saw a face where there is a hole in the structure of the heart. He saw a face barely forming through the etheric radiation, and as it formed one full face, words started to flow. The hammer stopped just an inch away from the core, and Glymet couldn't believe what he just saw and heard. Those words, them again. Like the one in the Eye of Magnus. No, not like, just similar different things. They rallied their request to Glymet, and his heart almost skipped a beat, and the hammer fell from his hand. The hitting stopped, the heart slowly calmed down, and the pain was gone. Glymet no longer had Sunder in his hand, but now he just had Keening. Wraithguard protects the soul, Sunder draws the power, and Keening takes it in. Glymet barely looked back at Loneth and smiled. And Keening drew the divine power of the mechanical heart. This wasn't going to be the fight of mere mortals. It's a titanomachy, a battle of the gods. Chapter 693, Clockwork Rises. Chapter 693, Clockwork Rises. The last chapter in the Saga of Glymet. Assimilation. 78%, 79%, 80%. The titans clashed. The sky roared, the earth shook, and the world split. And the entirety of Clockwork City was being siphoned into an apocalypse of colors. The bronze luster of the brass started to fade into dim ashen rust, and the machines died down. Even when John was about to desperately attack the clockwork dragon one more time, he saw the large creature come apart in pieces, as if whatever was holding its pieces together had suddenly vanished. He stood there and looked around to see all the rust that grew like parasites, eating everything. What sort of madness is this? The world went gray, it was dying. An apocalypse. The sunlight waned. The remaining stars hazed from the sky. The mountains crumbled over the view. The beasts raged across the radius and hoarded out of their lairs, and the surfaces of water burnt and boiled. But above all were the people whose hearts came crashing and breaking for the desperate sight of the doom that pincered them. If one was to scream, shout, run, it wouldn't really do much at this point. It would be a waste of time knowing that the end is nigh and it is taking them all. The best one could do was to look at the sky, the land, and the city and stare, or laugh as some did. Some fell into hysterical laughter, and while others just forgot about everything and succumbed to madness. All of the city knew that the disaster of the assimilation was over, but this other disaster is completely turning everything to dust. Hope wasn't even on the table anymore. Hope has. Fuss Arodit just arrived. The sealed gates of the brass fortress blew open, and one man walked amidst the smoke covered in a black substance that started to turn into a set of ebony armor. He walked through looking at desperate masses, and on his shoulder was the great halberd he wields. As he took a look at the masses, he realized the situation of the city as the machines are all dead and the assimilation has stopped. The mechanical heart was damaged, badly damaged. Not quite destroyed yet. If you want to live, get to the Pavilion of Artifice, he said, and then pointed to the outside of the fortress. Follow the black cats. Whatever words said by a foreigner in times like these, so long they had the chance of actual hope in them. These people would experience literal resurrection. He is capable. Maybe he can save us. Maybe we can survive. That's how they thought. John opened the gates of the city, gate after gate, and let the people escape. He knows that the rate of their survival depends on their luck, which wasn't really looking good at the moment, but he can at least secure a safe place for some survivors before the end. He wasn't sure what would happen to these people afterwards, however. Can they actually leave the Clockwork City? The world that was made digitally? When the world was said to be a dream, it meant that its components were that of lesser reality than the world it branches from. To the orbis of a universe, the Clockwork City is a dream of a subsidiary reality, just like how Orbis is a dream of a subsidiary reality which John suspects to be the world of his origins. That's at least how Shadow explained it to him. It is not uncommon for a being from a higher-grade reality to descend into a world of a lesser reality. While that doesn't mean it is not difficult in actuality, the genius of Sotha Sil has actually made the process quite easy. So if John and the group of adventurers can get inside the Clockwork City, does this mean that beings from the Clockwork City can get out of it? If that is possible, John would save all the lives that are stuck here. This is too much even for me to pull off without casualties. Many have fallen already. John was distressed, but he continued acting as a one-man relief force while making Nefertiti summon Shadow Atronax in the shape of black cats to guide the people outside and fight any dangers. Just what is that old man doing? What Glymet was doing has already shocked everyone, him included. He wasn't willing to sacrifice himself after coming this far, after what already has happened. But he had to. He had to do it again. Why? He had to break his promise to Lonith one more time. Why are you doing this? He had to be the hero for just a single glimpse of hope. To me, to us. He just had to. The thoughts in his mind were already somewhere else. However, too far ahead, too much for mere mortals. He was sinking deep into the power of the heart, and he let it have what it wanted. Protect us, it said. Save us, it demanded. Fight for us, it commanded. Why would he do any of that? Because nothing was actually lost, not yet anyway. It can all be recovered, that's what the voice said. No, even Messenger could stop this no more. The power that is within him is now being halved, split, and divided. Bit by bit, he was losing the divinity he sacrificed so much to attain. It can't end like this. Messenger gathered all the energy left within him and started to whirl it around his heart, so he could recover, but all he did was put up a futile resistance. Unlike Glymet, who possessed the replicas of the tools of Kagranak, he has nothing but his body implants which he designed to help him contain the power. However, what was in front of him was way too mighty for him to contend against. The forgotten hero was shining with the power of the mechanical heart and reversed the assimilation. Within all the realms of possibilities and myriad colors of truth and falsehood, the heart contained the power to love. Love, which is divine, can reshape the lands, the jungles, and even the people. It can even do greater things that extend to the grasping of the fourth dimension and manipulating it to attain a complete lordship over the Siddhis, the change. Time can branch off and be rewound. That's the power of love, demonstrated time and time again, each time the brass tower walked. It is said that it walked even the eras ahead of ours, and still walks both the past and present. But more importantly, Nirn and the heart of Lorcan were created to satisfy one another, for there is no life without a heart, and there is no love either. The same case it was for the Clockwork City, the lesser mechanical dream of Nirn. Dreams are also tools for such hearts to wish and achieve boundless possibilities, and for each dream to be thought of. One had to dream it. Glymet surrendered to the dream and let his mind sink with the fleeting thoughts. Little did he know that he had already trampled over Messenger and walked further into the boundless sea of power. To the onlookers, Glymet wielded his sword with ease and struck down Messenger, for his mechanical arm to shatter on impact. Only one clockwork god can walk past the last threshold, and amidst the blood and screams of his opponent, Glymet was victorious. and he walked past with light enveloping every bit of his being. The phenomenon which occurred afterward was more unfathomable than the apocalypse that was unfolding. The assimilation ended, the apocalypse halted, and the recovery began. As if the world was turning to dust, and it was turning to dust, the particles of every strand of existence started to reform, to take shape, to reorganize themselves. John was in the middle of it all, just watching. He experienced that state and this power once, but not by this potency, not by this magnitude. He knew that the power to reshape the world was unfathomable and divine, but to witness it as a mortal, it was an incredible moment and a great opportunity. Many arcane secrets unfolded themselves before his eyes, and many things happened. The world started to breathe once again, and the sound of rapid ticking started to be heard. Beneath John's boots was something that kept twitching, and so he looked down at it, held it by his hand, and lifted it slowly. It was a part of a machine coming together back to life, with its minor internal clockwork parts joining together as one. The high rises across the city were rising even higher than what John imagined, and the lights of the street were lit again. Then the miracle happened. Life started to come from where one could least expect, and the murky waters and oils of the city started to come clearer and purer with the air and the sounds. The sound gave birth to the music, and the music gave birth to magic. Amidst it all, every abomination from those who were collapsed on the ground started to disintegrate, and from within, a person or a creature would emerge. None of them were actually dead. Messener's horrendous skills were focused on modifying the living rather than raising the dead, the process which proved to have more potential for evil than the latter one. But this miracle was only getting started. Not just were the people saved from the transformation into abominations. All abominations were healed first before turning back to normal. Then the awakening. Those who were on the ground rose up in utter confusion and puzzlement. Still, they never even uttered a word for the might of what they saw. And eventually, the color of brass returned and the world quietened. The raging beasts were soothed, the escaping citizens returned, and the mechanical birds flew over the sky that gradually, and for the first time in 200 years, turned blue. John felt a small hand touching his leg, and when he looked down, he saw an elven child looking carefully at what John had in his hand. As John looked at it too, he found that it had turned into a doll toy that moved using cogs and springs. John smiled and gave the toy to the child before slowly patting his head and walking off towards the Cogitum Centralis, the largest building furthest in the city. As John arrived, nothing seemed to be resisting his advance, so he pushed deeper further and further only to hear screaming. In the chamber of Lorcan, the scene was not over yet. The assimilation was reversed, the city was saved, but the evil still remained, and the hero was nowhere to be seen. GLYM. No, where are you? Lonith seemed to have gone through a panic attack, and her mind couldn't endure what she just witnessed. She ran to where Glymet stood just a while ago and kept running towards the heart and around. GLYM. Answer me, you fool. She screamed, ran, screamed again, and cried to fall to her knees in front of the cold, still corpse of her friend Swims at night. She then collapsed, hugged Swims, and wailed over her two companions whom she lost. No, it can't be. I can't, not after everything. Yet Lonith wasn't the only one in utter disbelief and rejection of reality. Messener survived. Unlike his glorious former self, he is now a fallen demigod covered in the shame of defeat. He crawled on the ground like a worm, missing an arm and a leg, yet despite all that, his eyes were fixated on the prize. He still looked at the heart without losing focus and kept crawling towards it. Coda won't allow you. Opposite of him was Coda, who was also quite weakened by the last fight and attempted to take a swing at the fallen Messener. Off my way, pest. Despite that, Messener barely swung his good arm, and a blast of energy sent Coda away. As Coda fell down, Ram's head also toppled off his shoulder piece and rolled on the ground, but before it rolled away, Coda held onto it and aimed it towards Messener. Now, as Coda shouted, Ram's eye glowed red and shot a laser beam towards Messner that hit his face splendidly. This heated laser beam charred a part of Messner's face and made him scream, but he still had some magicka left in him to deflect it away. The one who was going to join the fight last was Galen, who was busy with something just now, and as he tried to stop Messner, the deflected laser beam hit him badly and sent him flying. So, with tearful eyes, Coda couldn't keep aiming at Messner and looked at Galen with an apologetic look. However, the moment he lost his focus was an opening for Messner, who was about to cast a firebolt at the Argonia midget. But at the last moment, Messner experienced a cold feeling just not far from his intact shoulder. Right as he turned to look, a large polished ebony surface reflected his face, and as it was raised, Messner discovered that his remaining arm was no longer there. "No! Curse you! Curse you!" Above him stood John, who just arrived at the chamber of Lorcan, and the look on his face was that of an emotion that can't be spoken. "John Dare, I curse you and the day you." John didn't plan to hear Messner more than this, and with his hand, he clutched Messner's throat and picked him up. Having only one limb remaining, the possibility of torturing him was out of John's appetite, and all he could do was to raise him and make him look at the mechanical heart. John turned Messner over and made him look. He then came to his ear and spoke. "I want you to know that you have spent all your life pursuing what you can never have. I want you to know that you will die watching what you most desire not in your hand. I want you to die at the hand of John Dare and know exactly why I came after you." John said. "Say it." Messner put a final act of defiance. "You self-righteous hero. Say it. Call me evil. I was a god. I saw everything, all the suffering, all the effort. It is not worth it. A god for a few minutes? Spare me the nonsense." John replied, "I only came after you because you hurt my girl. It was personal, you know. Just you and I, man to man. Then you had to mess things up like that. You motherfucker." John spoke in a tone of hate that he never even felt anything like before. "Killing you ain't worth it. I'd boil you in oil, coat you in molasses, and make the bugs crawl all over your skin while you beg me to kill you. But all I can do now is to take pleasure as I squeeze the life out of you." Messner struggled, but John was as merciless as he can ever be. With two hands, John didn't squeeze on Messner's neck, but rather dug his fingers into it all, while Messner bled from his eyes, nose, mouth, and ears. Messner squirmed from the excruciating pain, and John didn't stop until he reached the bones and crushed them. The head and the body became two separate things and slipped down from John's hands. "And so that you don't dare to rest in peace, I'll personally hand your soul over to Molagbal." And with that last effort, John put the soul of Messner into a black soul gem, an eternal prison for a soul that would deny it from any decent form of an afterlife. All that was left was to take care of the mess left behind by the fight. John turned over to Loneth, who seemed to have collapsed unconscious over Swim's body, Coda, and Ram, who were a mess of their own, and Galen, who seemed to be carrying minor injuries. John has already realized what happened from what he witnessed outside and slowly walked to the mechanical heart where Galen was lying. "You all right?" John asked Galen and looked at him closely. I am," Galen replied, while gathering his robes together and trying to look decent. John, however, narrowed his eyes and kicked Galen down immediately. Just as he did that, 3 objects fell from Galen's robes, and John immediately aimed his halberd spearhead at Galen's throat. "And what were you aiming to do with those?" John asked with a murderous glare. Those objects that fell on the ground were nothing other than the replicated tools of Kagranak, the ones Glymet used to stop Messner. "No, please, listen to me," Galen cried. "These things, they shouldn't be here. They must be destroyed." Galen's cries were like those of someone in great crisis, and John found them satisfactory. He looked at the beating mechanical heart, which had a hole in its center, and saw how vulnerable it can be. "You are right." John then summoned the staff pride and aimed it towards the heart. "What are you doing?" Galen spoke fearfully, as if he was about to jump between John and the heart at any second now. "Worry not." With a strong gush of magicka, John's magic enveloped the heart and slowly started to reconstruct the damaged part using the fragments that were left behind. He didn't stop there and even added an enchantment around the heart to prevent anything from ever touching it. The same enchantment that was on the original heart of Lorcan. As the heart of the clockwork recovered, John put away his staff and breathed out calmly. He then turned to Galen and spoke. "You are right. These tools must be destroyed." While they were on the ground, John raised his halberd and was about to crush those tools with its pummel and mighty aura. Yet just before he even did it, a deep voice spoke from the deeper part of the chamber. "Apprentice of Divaith, I suggest you refrain from doing something foolish." All those who were still conscious in the room turned over and looked as if a figure walked in a room with the oddest sound of footsteps a man would ever have. The figure of such a man was short and chubby, yet he seemed to be quite legless. Instead of legs, however, he seemed to have replaced his lower body with that of a dwarven spider automaton. The man arrived at where Kodo was and picked up Ram's head with a smile. The look on everyone in the room was quite shocked from having an unknown individual sneak up on them like this. Still, the one shocked the most was John. "As I live and breathe," John spoke, and carefully walked away from the replicated tools of Kagranak before uttering the name of the living legend that stood in front of him, Yagrum Begarn. Chapter 694, A Journey Ends. Chapter 694, A Journey Ends. Losing all your loved ones, being unable to do anything about it, being trapped in the memories of the old you, and struggling through an oblivion of oneself. Loneth was already in a bad situation after the last events. But if there was one man in the entire world who would know these feelings way better than her, it is none other than Yagrum Begarn, the last living dwarf. Added to Discord Gallery, a dweemer from an age long gone, a man who survived through time thanks to his immortality. Yagrum Begarn was a legend to many. All of Tamriel's mages would pay endless fortunes to meet with the last dweemer craftsman, but he was usually a shy one. "Rest here, child. Sleep well." Yet that legend stood on his 8 spider robotic legs and helped Loneth lay down after her last mental outbreak. She was struggling with reality and seemed to have suffered immensely from the loss of Glymet and swims at night. Yagrum, the bearded, obese dweemer who was covered in a gray layer of blighted skin, was no stranger to loss. As the last living dwarf, let alone being an immortal, he must have at least some loose set of screws, but that is what made him competent enough to handle the devastated Loneth. As soon as she was put to sleep, Yagrum Begarn faced John Dare, who was busy with a mechanical heart. Yagrum watched what John did carefully, and with just a single glance, he was able to discern what John was doing. Seeing the young human wizard put that much effort into stabilizing and fixing the mechanical heart, Yagrum had a smile curling up his face. "You've grown just fine, I see," Yagrum said as he started approaching John. As his focus was no longer needed to maintain the heart, John replied, barely turning his head halfway. "I have heard of you, but I don't believe we've met before." John replied, "We haven't officially met, but that day in Tel FYR, I watched your challenge against Master FYR's dungeon." Yagrum said as he gave John a throwback to that time, when he first encountered the FYR sisters and Lord Divaith some years ago. That happened when Alf FYR ambushed Nurina and kidnapped her back to Morrowind. John smiled as he remembered those times. "I never noticed you were there," he said. "You wouldn't have. Officially, I've been in Clockwork City for some time now. I've only been keeping tabs on my laboratory from here." Yagrum said, "While you were not the only challenger of the time, you defeated the Sothasil formation I recreated and got the storage cube that I carefully hid. Sorry about that." John couldn't contain himself and gave off a short burst of laughter before gradually returning to the gloomy mood that was suffocating the room. "So," he continued asking, "I assume you are here for the familiar vibe of the place." Yagrum shook his head in response. "There is nothing familiar in this land. Sothasil has built something ingenious, but I don't feel anything relatable to my people here." Yagrum said, "Well, I felt there was something familiar, but I couldn't find it on my own until..." Yegrim seemed in a state between fear and excitement as he raised the thing he was holding on to for the past few minutes. Ram's head. John saw that and let go of the heart's restoration process. So Ram was a Dwemer, he said with interest. To be honest, I have no idea. Yegrim's reply, however, couldn't confirm or deny John's hopes. How so? John asked, filled with curiosity. With a big sigh, Yegrim stroked his beard with his fat hands and turned around. Follow me, he said. As Yegrim walked out of the chamber of Lorcan, John followed behind him, but he soon halted his steps before Galen and the other clockwork apostles who arrived later. Take care of Lonith until I arrive, John said. And the heart? Galen asked. It is stable now. The machine shall take care of the remaining phase of restoration, and the heart has its own protection protocols. It will retreat by itself to the hidden depths of the city at some point when maintenance is done. That's a relief to hear. Thank you, Master John. Galen bowed his head, despite the mixed feeling he had towards John, who insulted Sothasil on a few different occasions. As for John, he strode behind Yegrim Bagarn and caught up to him deeper beyond the chamber. So this is the inner curiosity of Sothasil. John wondered as he stood and saw what he saw. In front of him was a large chamber filled with sections, walkways, mazes, and many blueprints laying around. It was like the grandest laboratory ever. I've taken my liberty to use this place as my workstation. Yegrim laughed in awkwardness. You were here the whole time, while Messner was wreaking havoc? John asked. Don't get me wrong, boy. I was as terrified as your average sissy altmare. Fighting and bashing skulls the way you did, that's not my thing. Yegrim denied all interest in violets. Truly? How in oblivion did you survive all that time then? John asked with shock written all over his face. You think the last living Dwemer would be the last living Dwemer because of his prowess? Bah, if I hadn't laid low, we wouldn't be talking like this. So underwhelming. That's the problem with all Master FYR's disciples, brutes with brains. John couldn't help but admit that Yegrim Bagarn was right on point with what he said. Still, there seemed to be something Yegrim was intending to show him, and he was too focused on his surroundings to reply. It was like that until they all arrived at a large sealed-tight gate. Interested in unlocking that for me? Yegrim pointed at the gate and asked John. With narrowed eyes, John shifted his focus towards the gate and slowly examined it. He looked closely at all its details and was impressed by the craftsmanship and the arcane layers laid upon that gate. What do you think? Yegrim asked. Interesting, John exclaimed and got closer to the gate. I wasn't sure before, but now I have no excuse. About my brother Wolfer will kill me. He's obsessed with all manner of Dwemer technology, but this will get him mad that I didn't bring him over. That's not Dwemer, Yegrim said with a light chuckle. I know, John nodded. If I'm not mistaken, this is Sothasil's personal and ingenious craft. Despite the fact that the Clockwork City is all about imitating Nirn, the technology of Sothasil is almost at the level of the Dwemer, alas. With John's judgment, Yegrim Bagarn himself was worried by that last word John used. What is wrong? Yegrim asked. The technology of Sothasil compared to that of the Dwemer is as real as the Clockwork City compared to Nirn. John's opinion made Yargum's eyes widen and look not just at the gate in front of them, but all around him. You can't be serious, Yegrim said with obvious agitation. How long have you been here, Master Yegrim? John turned to Yegrim Bagarn and asked. I don't. Yegrim Bagarn seemed reluctant to answer, but after a whole minute of agonizing over the raging thoughts inside his head, he finally spoke them out. 70 years, he said. I see. John nodded and carried a look on his face filled with pity. It is your memory, isn't it? Yegrim couldn't face John and simply turned away with obvious dejectedness. Even Sothasil used memory stars to store the memories he's too afraid to forget. Yegrim said and sighed. After all, he's an immortal. In the 8th century of the First Era, approximately 3,700 years ago, Jaeger was an assistant craftsman of the Dwemer crafts Lord Kagranak, creator of the famous tools of Kagranak. The entire race of the dwarves disappeared from existence, while Jaeger was on an otherworldly errand. That saved him from the dragon break during the War of the Red Mountain, which led to the disappearance of the dwarves. As becoming officially the last living Dwemer, Jaeger searched for his own people while entering the service of Tamriel's greatest sorcerer, Lord Divaith Fyr, John's great grandmaster. Many years later, he contracted the divine disease, aka the Corpus, and became in his current physical state with a bloated body and disabled legs. While Divaith Fyr was able to halt the Corpus from turning its victims into husks, the process didn't cure them and left them with some aftereffects that included some physical deformities as well as an immortal body. The two most famous individuals who gained immortality like that are Jaeger, the last living dwarf, and the unwavering hero of Morrowind. Due to such abnormal immortality, the minds of the individuals who gained immortality via the Corpus started to deteriorate at certain points of their lives, and their old memories became distant and so unreal. It was something as close to clinical dementia. In the case of Jaeger, he needed someone like John with a good eye for advanced technology to tell him the vast distinction between the original Dwemer technology of his own people and the imitations of Sotha Sil. John went as far as claiming that the clockwork technology is based on the fact that it exists within the reality created by Sotha Sil and wouldn't amount to anything near the genius of the dwarves. Depressing? It may be if one looked at the grand scale of this world and Nirn. However, if one chooses to ignore the big picture, at least one can satisfy themselves with what is fake. The point here is that because Sotha Sil created his own world, he could make this world's rules to support his technology and imitate Dwemer technology. On one hand, some people can power and use Dwemer technology on Nirn, but no one is capable enough to rebuild the entire Dwemer civilization like Sotha Sil unless he changed the rules of the world itself. It is similar to how John created his domain to be an illusionary realm that resembles modern Earth without knowing all the inner workings of modern technology. But this leaves a paradox at the end. Was Sotha Sil more capable than the dwarves as he created his own realm despite being a digital one? Or were the dwarves smarter and more capable when they created things like the original tools of Kagranak and the walking brass tower, aka the mechanical god, Namidium? Luckily for Jaeger and John, they wouldn't find out the answer to that question. John decided not to speak any further and waited for Jaeger to put his thoughts together. Either way, Jaeger scratched his bald head and spoke to John. Beyond that gate, I think there is something related to the Dwemer. I take it that you have a rough idea of what it is. John asked. Probably something related to this little guy. Jaeger pointed at Ram's head and said so. You deactivated Ram? John asked. For now, Jaeger replied. He is too precious to leave unattained. I don't know how you found him, but during all my stay in this city, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Indeed, Jaeger nodded. Moreover, the locking mechanism of the gate. You surely know how to open it. John looked at the gate and nodded as he saw the 3 sockets on its exterior. These 3 sockets had 3 shapes. One was arm-shaped, one was dagger-shaped, and the last was hammer-shaped. I understand. John nodded and recovered the tools of Kagranak, the replicas which Sotha Sil created and Glymet recovered. Earlier, John wanted to destroy them per Gallon's request for no one to exploit the mechanical heart again, but Jaeger requested to wait before doing that. So there were also keys. John was really curious about what secret which lies beneath the gate they unlock, a secret that is mostly related to Ram. Carefully, John put Keening in the dagger-shaped socket, Sunder in the hammer-shaped socket, and Wraithguard in the central arm-shaped socket. Click, click, click. With the sound of the artifacts being accepted on the gate, the large gate started to turn like a wheel and go inside the wall to clear the way for the chamber behind it. A vault, a dark vault filled with nothing but research papers, old writing tools, and a bunch of memory stars lying around everywhere. In an odd sensation, John felt as if the mess outside the vault made by Yegram's research was a replica of the mess inside. That's it. It was as if Yegram Bagarn had spotted something else, Sotha Sil's study. Without a shred of hesitation, Yegram stepped into the vault and looked around it. All of the papers in this place were blueprints, magic scrolls, and charts for large and complicated machines and buildings. They were simple yet marvelous and ingenious in their own way. Yegram didn't care about the blueprints and such and started touching the memory stars one by one. It has to be here. It has to be in there. He kept mumbling as he looked through each memory star lying around. I think they are only personal memos, John said, but Yargum barely listened. John knew what Yegram was looking for. Relatively, it was the easiest thing to guess from the last living dwarf. He was looking for a trace of his people. After hundreds and thousands of years, the last dwarf is still looking. He was sure that to create this Dwemer-like clockwork realm, Sotha Sil had something of the dwarves left in his possession, something powerful enough to match the intellect of a Dwemer. John watched that and sighed as he went through his fruitless search. He must have already gone through Ram's memories and realized how incomplete and unreliable they were. That's why he is looking for something that can make sense to them. While Yegram was wrong about this as John thought, John himself was also wrong. The answer they didn't expect was just about to hit them right on the face. As Yegram was agitated by the voice of Sotha Sil that kept echoing in his head whenever he held a memory star, he soon realized that something was amiss and started to go through the whole thing one more time. But just as he did so, his mechanical legs got tangled up with some long curtain hanging in at the end of the room. Neither Yegram nor John expected anything when this curtain was torn down, but as soon as they saw what it was covering, the two of them almost fell on their asses. It was there all along, the Dwemer source that Sotha Sil used, the target of Yegram's search. Hardly could John understand what he saw, but it was there, sealed in a green liquid tube, the body of someone. The ears were as pointy as those of an elf, but the skin was dark in a different tone than that of the dark elves. The body build was weak, but the bone structure was strong, and the jaws were clearly distinctive. Moreover, two large tusk-like fangs rose from the lower jaw of that person. They looked like that of an orc, but that person hardly looks like one. He also had long braided hair. What was it they just saw? John was somewhat repulsed by the orc crossbreed, but unlike him, Yegram Bagarn was looking at the thing in awe, unable to believe that this could be the closest thing he could ever see to a Dwemer. An orc/dwarf. It was somehow mind-boggling for all the men that saw it, but not for a particular woman. Dwarf orc. Lonitha's voice was heard. John and Yegram turned back and looked at her, someone who seemed to have an answer they did not. Lonith was resting her arm on Coda's shoulder and slowly walked into the room. Her appearance was miserable, but she seemed to have found some power. Lonith, you must rest. John wanted to offer a helping hand, but she ignored him and turned to Yegram. That is, or he can be, none other than your king, Lonith said as Yegram's eyes kept widening. Dumak Dwarf Orc, Dumak Dwarf King, Dumalakath. She said those names that struck the two men like lightning. Dumas, the uniters of the Dwemer, the other leader of the Chimer Dwemer First Council, alongside the Hartater in Doral Nerevar. All eyes turned to the man in the green liquid tube, and with a lot of hesitation, Yegram slowly placed Ram's head on the pedestal in front of the tube. Ram's eyes opened slowly, and a voice spoke the most complete sentences that were to ever come out of that head. Oh. Chapter 695, Revelation. Chapter 695, Revelation. It has been a while since they smelled some clean, fresh air. John was worried he would get used to the stench of the Clockwork City, but now that it is all over, he's got a lot to think about. For that, he sat on the bulwark of the brass fortress watching the blue sky that finally emerged over this world for the first time in a very long while. First, the fate of Glymet. John was so busy with everything that happened with Yegram Bagarn to the point where it took his thoughts off the most important lesson that he learned from that journey. The fate of a hero. At a late point during this last adventure, John realized that for the first time, fate wasn't turning on him as Glymet was the one to save the day. For the first time in a long while, he was the supporting character in someone's story. It wasn't bad, at least it gave him a new perspective and a pearl of unprecedented wisdom. He contemplated a lot on that fate and realized that one day, the world will push it on him the same way it was pushed on Glymet and those who walked the walk before them. The eternal champion, the agent of the Emperor, the apprentice of the Battlespire, Cyrus the Red Guard, the unwavering, Master Tunnel Rat, the hero of Dawnstar, the soul of conflict, the hero of Kvatch, the soulless one, and lastly Glymet, the forgotten hero. These are a tiny handful of the people that were marked by fate as saviors and heroes, people who were given enough power to change the course of history, sometimes multiple times on the same occasion. But what happened to them in the end? Some of them disappeared as soon as they achieved their fate, such as the Eternal Champion, the Agent, and the Apprentice. Cyrus the Red Guard sailed to the sea and never returned. The unwavering attained immortality by the Corpus disease, but he also sailed far to Akavir. The hero of Kvatch mantled the Daedric prince Sheogorath and became Sheogorath. The rest have mostly disappeared with little to no mention in the annals of history. Lastly, the forgotten hero died during his battle with Messner at the Clockwork City. So, is this the fate that awaits him as well? Death, oblivion, will he be able to trick fate and find a different way, or will he just perish? Escaping fate has proven to be an impossible feat. Even the Etiata aren't immune to the turns of wheel over the tower, the spinner over the spindle, fate and time. Just how will John's journey end? The world uses heroes to give normal people a chance to face extraordinary odds, but once these odds are no more, the world can't let a hero roam around and be some sort of an uncontrolled force with immense power. To negate that, a hero must assimilate with a greater being like how the hero of Kvatch did it, or find some other leeway. If not, their demise is only a matter of time. There's an end to all things perfect, so one mustn't be blinded by life's spectacle. Times, as you can see, keep twirling, a time one may love and others one may hate. You can just say nothing lasts, Homan. Then I wouldn't sound deep enough, he said with a long, lazy sigh. Yet with one sacrifice, many lives were saved. Sacrifice. Nefertiti turned on her back and like her paused to clean her face, but he didn't really die. John didn't react to what that silly cat just said. He smiled and kept playing with her, yet in the back of his mind, he knew that what she said was true. Glymet didn't really die. He lived, but the status of his life is something that can't be called living. Glymet is now the prisoner of the clockwork, the heart of the machine, the secret melody in the hums of its steam engines and the motions of their pistons. Glymet has become one with the city. He realized something when he used the mechanical heart, and instead of choosing life, he chose to be selfless and give life from his own to those who may perish and fall. Such an act of love. John knows he is incapable of reaching this level of sacrifice, but Glymet did so without hesitation. The state which he is in now is a greater state of being, a step beyond mortality into the realms of power, far beyond the physical restrictions of life and death. The dwarf orc said something similar about the Dwemer, where they are and what they have lost and attained. Speaking of which, the encounter with the dwarf orc left John with answers, each of which opened the door for more questions. However, unlike the madness that struck Yegrim, John was a man in control of his greed. He cast away the desire to answer these new questions and decided to let go of the Dwemer pursuit, a path that definitely led many to their demise. Still, what he learned this time was incredible. The identity of the dwarf orc wasn't Dumak Dwarf King, but someone of his lineage. Someone Sotha Sil got a hold of and used it as an experiment way before the disappearance of the dwarves. Because that individual was isolated in a death-like coma, Sotha Sil used his genius to access their memories and install their knowledge on a factotum's head, the one called Ram. It seemed that this dwarf orc was some sort of knowledgeable person of the arts of the Dwemer and was exploited by Sothasil to develop his clockwork technology. The fact that would cause a great uproar if it were to ever go public. Sothasil is still hailed by some as the mind that rivaled the Dwemer, not the one that copied their knowledge. It was just as John said, the clockwork technology is more about imagination and imitation, unlike the genuine tonal architecture of the Dwemer race. With those answers, John was satisfied and chose to ignore the rest. As for the aftermath of the battle that occurred, the Clockwork City started recovering at a rapid pace as soon as the mechanical heart relocated itself deep under the city. With that, the halls of regulation started to function at max output and absorb the pollution and fumes from the atmosphere to replace them with clean, fresh air. Even the pneumatic forge was working nonstop on new factotum models that were sweeping over the radius outside the brass fortress and cleaning the endless deserts of junk and wastes. This world seemed as if it had acquired a new will of its own and was functioning on an automated order of tasks. With the rate it is going on, it would take 1 year to reach peak efficiency, 2 years to harmonize with the output of the mechanical heart, and at least 5 years to clean every last spot in this realm. Despite that, there was something gentle about this whole thing. The factotums were all functioning according to the general artificial intelligence that is being transmitted from the brass fortress. While most factotums have their personal data units and set of protocols, they still upload data and download command from the main unit. John noticed that around Loneth, these factotums were acting with absolute care and offered her all the assistance she needed. They also helped Coda reunite with his sister, who happened to be a Nord human native to this realm. It even requested that RAM can be recovered to the main unit in order to transmit the personality construct of the dwarf orc subject into its core as it was originally intended. And finally, the factotums handed John 2 items, a sword and a coin. It seemed that despite his sacrifice, part of Glymet had lived inside the machine. Galen claimed that the hero who saved the Clockwork City is present within the heart as a whisper of its churning gears. The Clockwork Apostles thanked their saviors for their courage and sacrifice. While it is not enough to return the dead, everyone has lost someone in the latest crisis. As for Loneth, it is known for a fact that elves, who live for more than 100 years, would suffer immensely whenever they lose someone from their days of youth. They would either grow sorrowful, cold, or sometimes cynical and violent. Loneth was still recovering from a loss, and the effect it would take on her was unknown. As for Jägerbegarn, he decided to stay behind in the Clockwork City for a few extra years in order to watch over Ram, a half-dwarf who may have memories from the time of the Great Dwemer Nation. Coda decided to gather the survivors of the Tarnished Nomads and return to the Radius, even with Galen's offer for them to stay as citizens. Trust wasn't prominent between the Tarnished and the people of the fortress, and so they wished to continue living their freedom outside the walls. Finally, John headed back to the Pavilion of Artifice and started collecting some toys and mementos. He also gathered a few organic materials in order to see how such things will materialize from the metaphysical realm of the Clockwork City into the physical realm of Nirn, a process he was most curious about. Moreover, he left a prisoner in the Pavilion of Artifice right before the final battle, and that was a blonde Nord mercenary that had a rivalry with John, Aldora the Daring. "I shall offer you safe passage to Skyrim," John said to her as he broke her cage. "If the Clockwork Apostles were to find you, you'd be killed as Messener's last living lackey." "What's the catch?" she replied. "I shall never work for you after you killed all my subordinates. And I wouldn't go out of my way and offer you freedom unless there's a catch." John said, "Your employer won't be me, but a friend of mine. I'll only fill your pockets with gold, and you take your orders from her." "Want to write a contract?" Aldora asked with a mocking face. "Your word and reputation shall be enough for me," John said, and cleared the way for Aldora to meet with Loneth. While being one of the people who had a bitter relationship with John because of how he expanded and took over the business, Aldora was still a famous adventurer and a competent sailor whom John tried to hire many times. Moreover, she was from Dawnstar, the town where John has no fans whatsoever. But with a job given to her and an employer as important as Lonith, Aldora was willing to take the job and see it through. Her tonicity was clear when she was hired by Messenger and remained under his service despite his actions. For now, John has fulfilled Lonith's last request. Tell Master Nurina that I was honored to work with her. Lonith said, and when you inform your Uncle Tyr of what happened here, make sure he doesn't do anything reckless. I will. John nodded. Lonith was leaving. She no longer wanted to remember her sorrow and chose to leave everything behind. You have it, she asked John, Glymit's last belongings. John nodded and offered the sword and the coin to Lonith. Lonith looked at the sword with sorrow as if her heart was shrinking from inside, and she closed her eyes to squeeze out 2 streams of burning tears. I've always hated that sword, she said and cried bitterly. She held out her hand and took the coin, Glymit's farewell. That coin was given to him by Sails Through Storms, the sister of Swims at Night, and the captain of a ship that sails to the Dragon Isles on the road to Akavir. It is a ticket to that ship. Lonith was truly leaving all behind. You've grown into an incredible man, young John, Lonith said. I still remember our first research together. The flame horse Atronak. John smiled. It feels like ages ago. It feels like yesterday to me. She said, farewell, John, and she left with Aldora through the portal leading to Skyrim. John kept standing there with Glymit's sword, or rather Bothia's sword, Goldbrand. Soon after, he gave the Clockwork City one last look before turning around and walking through the portal back home. He may have been too busy to notice, but watching him from afar was a pair of mechanical eyes that belonged to a factotum. It kept watching over the whole thing as a patch of factotums was scrapping the junk in the surrounding area. Just as they left, the factotum looked at the sky with no visible emotion on its mechanical face, and then returned to its new life. 2 weeks later, High Hrothgar. The Dragonborn gathered the lords of Skyrim to the summit of High Hrothgar, and as they all shouted and argued, he took off his helm. On that day, Thane Jondare of Winterhold was revealed to be the last Dragonborn. Volume 8 end. Don't forget to vote. Lonith will return in the sequel Dragonborn Saga, Mysterious Akavir, I say. Chapter 696, Eldritch Tidings. Chapter 696, Eldritch Tidings. Volume 9, let's go. It wasn't long since the situation had gone that bad, and the lives of the villagers were threatened. Moreover, it has been 200 years since the appearance of the last set of disasters. The world may have gone calm, but this island was never peaceful. Many of the villagers went missing. Even those who made this journey were not safe, and most of them fell to the influence of evil. Eventually, it was 2 who made it to the ship and fled to Winterhold. They had to meet him, the man who can save their people, the Bloodskull. It was a bright night. The sea was calm, and the stars were reflected on the clear water. The birds were lazy at night, and the weather was getting warmer after the winter season. As miraculous as the rise of Winterhold was, the snow was melting after the winter season from the buzz of life alone. The arcane engines, the magic reactors, the busy docks, the stacked buildings, and the dense artificial groves all contributed to this new phase of climate control. Winterhold was experiencing a warm season after the past long winter. While spring would usually be no different from winter, this year's wind came warmer than ever, and the dense twin cities of Winterhold and Sarthel warmed one another. Between the 2 cities, and exactly to the north at a certain beach, sat a man who just said his farewells to a friend and watched her take a boat to solitude. John was home with a busy mind and a busier heart. As soon as he arrived earlier this morning, he met his close family members starting from Nurina, Hilda, and Alina all the way to Tyr, Scotty, and his cousins. There was much to do, to talk about, and to let off their chests. At first, John learned that Archmage Savozarin had recovered, but it seemed that his injuries were so severe from his fight against Encano, who used the Eye of Magnus. This severe injury led to the fact that he was no longer able to walk straight. Still, he sent his appreciation to John for the artifact that saved his life and announced his retirement as the Archmage. He tried to set someone as the next in line for the Archmage seat, but neither John nor Nurina were willing candidates, and so the position was given to Alina and postponed for an election. As for Alina, she had a thorough conversation with John about the situation of the college and how she thought it was reckless to manage the future he knew about with such carelessness. While John was positive about her opinion, he stated that the outcomes he knows about are more beneficial than solving the problems before they arise. In the case of the college, letting things play as they did not only resulted in a Nord like Alina being the Archmage of the college, but it also gave the College of Winterhold politics and financial power now that it is officially under the sponsorship of the House of Dare. Not only that, but other Tamrielic institutions, such as the Synod and the College of Whispers, got a lot of bad reputation after slandering the College of Winterhold for a long time, especially now that the College of Winterhold was rumored to have had connections with the world's most powerful cabal of mages, the Psijic Order. Alina's most dire concerns regarding the college were about the Augur of Dunlane, the entity of a mage whose mortal shell was destroyed and whose Inuic form is still tethered to this world by arcane means. The problem here is that the Augur is a very knowledgeable entity, but has no independent will of his own and acts in a horological manner rather than being bound to the state mortals are bound to. It means that as a being that can see past, present, and future doesn't bother with temporal boundaries and can reveal dangerous information on a whim. For example, the information he revealed to Encano about the Eye of Magnus that led to the late disaster in Winterhold. While it has become dangerous to leave the Augur be, Alina knows that John needs the Augur's help every now and then, so before she took action, she had to consult with John. After an hour of arguing, their final decision was to collapse the tunnel leading to the Augur's chamber and put wards around it to keep anyone from finding its location without losing themselves in the maze of the maiden. John still had a back door to reach the Augur's abode anyway. With that out of the way, John had his schedule freed to the end of the day and finally arrived at where Lonith was preparing for departure. He carried her belongings and walked with her to the pier. He couldn't bring himself to tell her to stay unlike how the others tried since he witnessed her mental breakdown back at the Chamber of Lorcan. If Lonith needed anything right now, it is to change her surroundings to unfamiliar ones and try to forget while doing what she does best, wandering. Glymit's last two belongings were split between Lonith and John. She took the coin, and he received the sword. He asked her what Glymit was thinking when he signed up for a journey out of Tamriel. She answered him that if he, who is as human as Glymit, didn't know this answer, then he must contemplate more. In truth, John had a few guesses in the back of his head, but he refused to follow them. Unlike Glymit, whose journey was long and took him years upon years, John's journey is way faster, much more eventful, and is bringing him tidings on the winds. Other people came to see Lonith off, and that included Tyr Firemane, who was a friend to her, as well as Swims at Night and Glymit. There was also Hilda and Jonrad Firemane, who knew Glymit and swore to hold a grand funeral for him, if not for John request not to. Glymit didn't die. After all, he merely transcended his normal existence, but so it is with death. On the night of that day, John was sitting alone at the pier after Lonith's departure with his feet dipped in the cold seawater, gazing at the stars and praying. That's when Jonrad approached him. The two spoke calmly and without going after each other's words like usual. At the end of their conversation, John handed Jonrad the sword Glymit used to carry, Goldbrand. For a dragon knight like Jonrad, this was an unimaginable treasure. And so the days went on. 3 days have passed, and not much has happened. John busied himself with some of the work he missed out on now that Alina is busy running the College of Winterhold. Aside from work, John was keeping tabs with Jelinar on the situation in Riften regarding the Thieves' Guild. The last piece of news that reached him was that the guild almost managed to catch Mercer Fry at Darkwater Crossing, but he slipped away from them and wasn't found till now. On the other hand, John seemed to have been waiting for the time when Carlia gets ready to invite them to the Sanctuary of the Nightingales. That day, a piece of news was spread from Whitron about the advent of the new harbinger of the companions, Wulfur of Winterhold. This news, along with Alina's new position, made a big fuss in every court of power around Skyrim, that John Dare is now taking over the big guilds. If the mages and the warriors of Skyrim are his people, this makes him way stronger than he already is, and not just that, his popularity is now on a par with Talos and Akatosh in the hearts of young Nords. Moreover, his actions almost crippled the civil war like this, as he opposes the idea of Nords killing one another. Those youth who would join the armies marching east and west would eventually go to the companions and the college instead. It would even be very prestigious if one were to become a Dare trooper. Now, what would these people think if they found out that not only does John control the companions and the college, but also the Dark Brotherhood, and also all the Thieves Guild? He was about to reinstate his family and friends as the heads of the major factions in all things. And with that, once Mercer Fry is caught, John can say that he finished all the guild quests from the game via his proxies. Meanwhile, the man behind the scenes was now absorbed in training with his best friend Wulfur. The two of them were trying the new artifact Wulfur has gained, the eternally famous axe and Iskramor's first companion, Wuthrad. The legendary axe was restored once Wulfur eradicated the Silverhand clan, a group of warriors and hunters who swore to kill the werewolves of the Companions' inner circle no matter how many men, women, or children they killed to achieve it. He also freed the soul of the previous harbinger of the Companions from its eternal servitude to the Lord of Hunt, Herson, who bestowed the gift of the wolf blood upon the Companions. With that, John and Wulfur decided to head down to the old quarry in the shadow of Mount Anther and train using both Volendrung and Wuthrad. But away from this and that, and back to the city of Winterhold, a ship arrived from the direction of Morrowind bearing the flag of House Redoran. From it, two Nords, a young man and a young woman, came down wearing what seemed to be heavy for winter wear. They looked up with their mouths agape, and their eyes rounded in shock at the sight of the College of Winterhold that heavily sat on a formidable stone spire that rose from the sea. Its incredible sight took the breath away from the two kids, and they held each other's arms in fear. "Sister, that thing isn't falling on us, right? I don't know, my head keeps making it look like it is falling on us, but it doesn't fall. Allmaker, who's mad enough to build something this way?" As the two kept talking and trying to walk out of the pier without tripping, they attracted the attention of a man with a large scar. "No one was mad enough to build anything like that, Skull," the man said, and the two kids turned around. It was simply built on normal land like any building, but when a wave as big as a mountain swallowed half the city to the sea, only the college remained since it had deep roots reaching down far in the sea. The two kids looked at the scary man who was in a sailor's robe and ordering the men on a large ship to offload some crates before thanking him for the tip and hurrying away from him. "Sigh, the boss always tells me to greet visitors at the dock, but with a face like mine." Ongium Scarmouth, the leader of the Dare fleet, seemed disheartened as John always pestered him to be some sort of a tour guide on the docks. Back to the two teenagers, they approached the large slope beneath Winterhold and noticed that aside from a large stone stairway going up the slope, there was a large box going up and down the slope. The dock workers were loading it with crates and letting it rise up on chains. It would eventually climb the slope faster than anything and would reach a platform that kept making noises like a non-stop growling beast. What a curious thing, the teenagers thought, as they were not really from such a civilized place like this city, but this sort of thing reminded them to keep their wits about them and not act like uncivilized morons. At least not to dishonor the name of the Skull. They had to act with class and dignity. That attitude, however, wasn't kept up once they reached the surface of the main city, for there was much to be in awe about than their entire lives. Summon a Skyrim player in a city like this and tell them it is Winterhold. They'd immediately scoff at you and walk the other way, or they would use their heads and start naming out the mods that have been used to fix up the game's most deserted settlement. The current theme of the city was as if Pro Gamer had played a city builder game and elaborately placed every building where it would get positively affected by every possible benefit in terms of architectural and planning design. Starting from the bottom upwards, There were polished and evenly leveled tiles paving the streets. Not a single animal or carriage was allowed and not to cause any traffic jam, and the crates that were being sent up from the dock were immediately taken away into a warehouse dug inside the mountain west to the city. Above this, all were stone buildings with large windows and pointy roofs, all densely packed together in patches of compounded buildings with either a small public garden or a service stall, making a much-needed space between these buildings at structural vital points. Still, the buildings were packed together this way to prevent the cold wind from blowing freely across the city and keep some warmth trapped within. Of course, the two teenagers were not informed about architecture to figure out such elaborate details only focused on appearances, such as the magical College of Winterhold and the Grand Temple of Kine, as well as the roaring machine, which lifts and lowers that contraption from the dock. It was all wild and magical, but they weren't here to lose their focus like this. They were here to bring a message to a friend of their clan. A few years ago, when they were still kids, a merchant from Winterhold came to their village for trade. Furthermore, he was an adventurer warrior who conquered an evil tomb and saved some lives along the way. The Skull regarded him as a friend and titled him the honorary title of Bloodskull for friendship. Moreover, he possessed a sword forged in their land and carried the same name as the title. In times of great danger, the Skull wouldn't usually call anyone out, but if a Bloodskull exists, the Skull only seek those trustworthy people if they can't face their adversities alone. Lately, disasters have struck, and an eldritch evil has invaded the very essence of Solstheim to its air, land, and waters. For that, they had to deliver a call for help to Bloodskull to John Dare. Chapter 697, The Skull Siblings. Chapter 697. The Skull's siblings in the eyes of an outsider. The abundance of goods, foods, and welfare in both Sarthel and Winterhold was massively unfair, if not outright unrealistic. Those who live in tribes away from the densely populated cities have to survive year in year out through the harsh winters and unstable living conditions. Winterhold was basically just like them 6 years ago, but now people are too busy to greet one another in the streets. Some are even walking around with their minds occupied with their business and living expenses, and some are haggling upon things that outsiders would find bizarre. Alfhild and Foamrim of the Skull were repulsed at times by the situation of the city when the people seem unfriendly and impatient, and amazed at other times when they see the riches and goods displayed in the market, which can feed their clan for 10 years to come. Despite being young, the two had a feeling of being content in their hearts. Being a Skull is akin to being one with the world, and it is both healthy and mind-opening. They don't want to get as ill-mannered as those city folk, even if it meant they would have everything in the world. Tranquility was much more important to them. But that was the case for the city of Winterhold. When they arrived in Sarthel, however, they were introduced to a very organized city built on an open space with wide roads and less density in structures. Moreover, the towers standing in the middle of Sarthel gave them the shock of their lives, as they had never seen such a towering man-made thing before. According to the information they've obtained, the man they came to meet is a strong warrior wizard who lives in that tower. Not only that, but he is some sort of a folk hero to the people of the mainland. This would definitely make him a difficult man to approach, but that just got more difficult the moment they got near the tower. Before they got close enough to see the tower's entrance, they expected some large shut gate where no one goes near out of respect for the authority, and they would have to knock on the gate or something, but that wasn't the case at all. The gate of the tower was open wide, and hundreds of people were coming and going. Moreover, there are guards and warriors gathered around the gates, and even inside the tower. This was bound to be a different kind of difficulty, maybe as difficult as seeking an audience with a king. But they can't back down. While the image of their heads about John Dare was that of a strong warrior who had relations with their people, they never imagined that he would be something of such high peerage, but that can't stop them now. Their people depend on the help they can get from this man, and he made a promise to the elders to be there whenever they call for his help. And so they decided to enter the tower. Yet contrary to everything they expected, no one stopped them from entering. Not the guards, not the warriors, not the busy people rushing in and out while hauling packs of rolled documents. This gave the two a sense of existential dread. They relied on the fact that if anyone sees strangers from strange lands entering an important building, they would be stopped and questioned, and from that point, they would talk to someone that may lead them to John Dare. But that's just absolutely bizarre. Foamrim then decided to take the lead and walk in confidently until he finds someone not busy enough to talk to. Just as their eyes got adapted to the lighting of the interior, they found it to be built in the same cold Nordic stone architecture with a flavor of classiness. The place was lit by hanging chandeliers that didn't carry candles, but rather something magical that casts light in a very calming way. As they got through the entrance hallway, they found two circular hallways going left and right with many side doors opening to more interiors within. There was also a straight way that led to a very large circular hall where some sort of meeting was happening. Well, that was it for Fangrim's courage. He felt awkward and didn't know where to go. He wouldn't certainly be able to walk into that large hall without causing a scene. On the other hand, Alfhild seemed to have found an important-looking man standing behind a pedestal and seemed like he was waiting. She tapped the shoulder of her brother in a way that indicated that he should follow. As they stopped in front of the man, she took the lead to speak. "Greetin', if you are here for the employment office, please follow the blue pane on the floor. Just remember that you need your evaluation certificate from the company branch you want to be employed in." The man, who seemed to be a Breton, started talking with a tired tone as if he said this line to anyone who came in before. "What? We're looking for John Dare." While Alfhild was confused, Foamrim managed to push the awkwardness aside and asked about John Dare right away. The Breton, whose eyes were glued to a ledger on the pedestal, stopped looking at his work and raised a single brow as his eyes moved slowly between Alfhild and Foamrim in a sense of superiority. Thane John Dare." The Breton spoke while pressing on the word Thane. "Yes." Foamrim frowned. "His name is Thane John Dare. I have no qualms with how brash you Nords can be, but even the Nords don't drop the titles of their Jarls and Thanes. Thane John Dare is how you address him," the Breton said, educating these two complete outlanders. "Yes, right. Thane John Dare." Alfhild didn't even try to argue with the haughty Breton and cut right to the chase. "We're here to deliver him a message from the Skull." "I have no clue what that is." The Breton dismissed them. "We're a clan from Solstheim," Alfhild stated. "Then you should have sent your message through the Solstheim outpost," he replied while closing his ledger. "It was attacked," Foamrim said. "Excuse me." The Breton man was surprised by what he heard. Solstheim is the realm of House Reduran, a very close ally to the company. "We would have been informed. Raven Rock is under attack as well. The Reduran guards won't help us. The Dare Company people seem to have gone missing too." Alfhild spilled everything. The man was somewhat baffled, but he didn't dismiss the two teenagers. As a professional employee, he had to go through the procedures of such an event. This was a very important clause in the employment contract. If any employee was to receive any critical piece of information that would affect the flow of the company affairs and report it, they would be rewarded by the significance of the gains their information achieves or the risk it prevents. Withholding such critical information, however, will result in punishment. It is safe to say that this previous clause was a game-changer in the career of many employees who used it to gain many benefits in their fields such as promotions, raises, rewards, and many other things. Without any hesitation, the Breton employee said, "Follow me," and darted off to a hallway. The siblings followed him and found themselves in a very large office where the Breton employee was talking to other employees. In mere seconds, he took them outside the tower and ran northward to a large building with many carvings and artistic beauty. "We are lucky," the employee said. "Lady Alina is in the temple today." "Lady Alina?" Alfhild asked. "Lady Alina Dare," the employee said, "the wife of Thane John Dare. What kind of place is Solstheim to not know such a thing?" While the Breton employee was clearly not aware of how far an island like Solstheim is, the two teenagers didn't get worked up with his attitude and simply followed him to the temple. Unlike the Dare Tower, whose people were running around instead of walking normally, the temple was way calmer and had a very friendly vibe to it. With the symbols of the hawk carved on the marble walls of the temple and many flowers and magics surrounding it with a calming mood, the first thing they could see inside was not quite calming at all. In the garden of the temple sat a beast with long wings, piercing eyes, sharp talons. One look from those piercing eyes would inspire terror and leave many frozen in dread. However, that beast just sat over there in complete harmony with the atmosphere of people and visitors around it. Not just that, but some children would actually pick flowers and go to the beast directly and put them around it before coming in contact with it at the sight of their cheering parents. These people are total nuts. That was the first thought that came across the minds of the pale Fongrim and Alfhild. Oh, you're in luck. Even the hurried Breton employee stopped his tracks and turned towards the beast sitting in the garden. The snow-capped griffin of Lady Alina is here. That beast? Fongrim asked while pointing at Lochther. It is a holy beast to the cult of the hawk, a manifestation of the spirit of the Nordic deity Kine. You haven't heard about it? The Breton asked. No, Alfhild replied, but to let children this close to it. Well, the Nords are too fond of this majestic beast, and so are the High Elves. Some people would come from far places with their children to let them meet the beast of Kine, who may bless their children with a strong vitality and healthy physique. The Breton explained. Such a thing is truly wild. Alfhild commented in complete amazement. The fact that you are a Nord and you are unaware of this is quite odd. What do you people worship on Solstheim? The Breton asked. The Allmaker, Fongrim replied. Is it like Anu the Everything? The Breton narrowed his eyes while asking. The head shaman mentioned that name once. Alfhild replied as she struggled to remember. How refined. There are Nords who worship Anu. The Breton was somewhat impressed to hear about elf-like Nordic worship that happens in such a rural place. Well, let's not waste any more time and go to the second beast of Kine. There is a second one? Alfhild asked. Oh yes, the Mad Bull. The Breton replied. That sounds way nicer than an actual griffin. Fongrim said since the sight of Mad Bulls was something quite frequent in rural villages, such as the Land of the Skull. But a few seconds later, I'll take back what I said, Fongrim said as he stood in awe in front of the so-called Mad Bull. Deep into the temple stood an 8-feet-tall gigantic creature with the head of a bull and the body of a humanoid. Despite the savage vibe emitted by that creature, it was dressed in a golden silk robe that was imported from Cyrodiil and was fashioned into a habit of a priest. Greetings, Brother Jax. I present 2 members of the Skull clan of Solstheim who have relations to the House of Dare. They came with a plea for help from Thane John. The Breton said. Addressing the Minotaur as Brother Jax was quite the shock to the siblings, but Jax was working as an official priest of Kine during his stay in Winterhold. Officially called Javir and Fuxo's Drumhoof, shortened by John and Jax at CH-429, Jax was a Minotaur fighter slave from the Grand Arena at the Imperial City. In his early fights, John faced Jax, and instead of killing him, Jax was spared and freed by John, who became the Grand Champion. Since then, Jax has served John as his carriage driver and other jobs, but lately, he has joined the cult of Kine, the mother of man and beast. And since the Minotaurs are the descendants of the demigod Morihau's Breath of Kine, who is a winged man-bull, it helped Jax to become a priest at the temple after proving his gentle nature and high intellect. The high priestess is inside. Jax spoke to the Breton, and with one hand, he pushed a large gate open as effortlessly as one would open a simple door. That gate led to the inner sanctum of the temple. Before they could freely walk in, Jax assigned someone to guide them inside, since they were in the staff-only section of the building. Just as they passed the first corridor, they found themselves in a grove with a ceiling made of glass and metal. The light of the sun was shed in, and it made an atmosphere of magical scenery, where one can't even begin to imagine how such kinds of plants were brought to grow into the barren and cold Winterhold. The garden at the temple's yard was one thing, but this thing right here is both out of place and out of season. I've heard about this. a chamber whose temperature was altered by magic to allow all kinds of plants to grow. Brilliant, isn't it? The Breton said with all the excitement in the world. Magic? Temperature? Exotic plants? Towers? Cities? Trade companies? The siblings were absorbing all of these new things they were witnessing for the first time in their lives. And from their point of view, this was all too much for just normal people to have. The identity of the people they were sent to meet must be way beyond what they can even fathom. But these thoughts didn't last long, for there was something which their senses started to pick on, something that crawled under their skin and made the very air they breathed much heavier. Simultaneously, the siblings turned around in the direction where they picked on that feeling. Foamrim started sweating while Alfhild was holding her chest. In front of them stood a tall, beautiful lady who was confused by their reaction and seemed not to know what to do. "Are you two all right?" Alina asked as she came to meet the visitors, but their appearance made her worried over them. "Watch out," Alfhild spoke. "Something very bad is here." This state of alertness made Alina focus all her ocular powers and scan the surroundings for anything that may have threatened the two teenagers, but there was no such thing. "What is going on?" At that time, someone came from behind Alina, and just as they got closer, the teenagers stepped back as if they were ready to run. "Master? It's nothing. I am just having visitors," Alina said as she turned towards Nerina. But just as Nerina saw the two teenagers, the look in her eyes sharpened, and she stared at them for a second or two before looking away. "You'd hardly call those things visitors. I'll leave you to your affairs. Let's meet tomorrow," Nerina said, and immediately walked out of the inner sanctum for the teenagers to slowly calm down, and for Alina to be completely bewildered and befuddled. Just now, Nerina, who was nice to all children 200% of the time and oversaw an orphanage for more than 20 years, acted that harshly towards children. And did those children just have that kind of reaction to her? Even with Alina's foresight, she didn't see that one coming. Just what is going on? Now you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.